Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the silk-draped world of royal weddings, where the lace is heavy, the air is perfumed, and the future you just walked into might be a carefully choreographed trap. You're not just marrying a person, you're marrying a kingdom, a treasury, and a tangled web of ancient feuds. The harpists are still playing, the guests are still toasting, but your stomach, it's doing backflips under a brocade corset. Candles flicker along the stone walls and rose petals scatter like confetti across the polished floor. Somewhere behind you, a diplomat sighs with relief. You've just secured 10 years of uneasy peace between rivals. But you can't even remember the groom's full name. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand at the center of a cavernous cathedral, dressed in ivory satin, heavy with embroidery that took 5 blind nuns 6 months to finish. Your train stretches 12 feet behind you, flanked by flower girls who can't stop sneezing. Everything smells of wax, incense, and someone's nervous sweat. Probably yours. Everyone's watching. No pressure. Royal weddings are never just about vows. They are the final chess move in negotiations that have lasted years, sometimes decades. This isn't your love story, it's your dynasty's survival strategy. You're not the main character in this tale. You're the golden key unlocking an alliance. A treaty in pearls and chiffon. And sure, there's a ring and a kiss and maybe a choir singing high enough to rattle the stained glass. But what really matters is that you smiled at the right people, stood on the right side of the aisle, and didn't trip on your hem as you knelt for the Archbishop's blessing. Because even that could be seen as a sign. Was she hesitant? Was she weak? Did she stumble like her great-grandmother did right before the Protestant revolt? Everything means something, even blinking. You try to breathe as you glance over at your new husband. He's got the posture of someone who'd rather be anywhere else, possibly jousting, possibly asleep. He's dressed in crimson and ermine, with boots that cost more than your father's hunting estate. His expression says mild indigestion, but to the nobles in the third row it probably reads as stoic leadership. Some royal weddings involved couples who'd never met until that moment. Others, like Catherine of Aragon and Prince Arthur, were betrothed by proxy years before they ever laid eyes on each other. They still had to go through the ritual motions, of course, complete with a symbolic wedding bed blessed by bishops, which is, frankly, not something you ever want embroidered on a pillow. There's a mainstream historical fact for you. Medieval royal beds were blessed by clergy before being used for consummation, because nothing says romantic evening like a priest sprinkling holy water on your mattress. And if you think that sounds awkward, remember, Henry II would later claim that Catherine of Aragon's marriage to Arthur had been consummated, even though she swore it hadn't, just so he could wiggle out of marrying her himself. Historians still argue whether Catherine was telling the truth or just had really convincing denials backed by the Pope's paperwork. But let's not jump ahead to annulments and royal temper tantrums. For now, you're still standing at the altar, wondering if your veil is too tight or if it's just the crushing weight of expectation. The feast will come later, venison, sugared almonds, and enough wine to make a monastery nervous. The guests will dance, the servants will drop things, someone's pet monkey will probably steal a tiara again, but you'll spend the evening wondering if your new life is going to be poison dagger dramatic or just quietly miserable. Either way, you won't get to choose. Even the weather today was likely planned. You heard whispers of rituals the night before, prayers to saints for good fortune, herbs scattered on thresholds, and one noblewoman who swore by burying a raw egg under the bridal path to keep your future fertile. A quirky little tidbit, yes, but when your entire worth is measured by your womb, raw eggs suddenly seem deeply symbolic. The music swells, you walk, you smile, you nod. You are now a symbol, not a girl. The ceremony ends, the people cheer, and history forgets how your palms were sweating. Your earliest memory isn't of playing with dolls or climbing trees, it's of standing still for an oil portrait, wearing a miniature crown that pinched your scalp. You were 5 years old and newly engaged, not to your neighbour's son or the baker's boy, but to a distant prince who lived 3 mountain ranges and a full language away. He'd just turned 4. The engagement was sealed with a promise, a parchment, and a tiny gold ring you promptly lost in the garden. Betrothal in royal circles wasn't just early, it was absurdly early. By the time your baby teeth fell out, your marital fate was locked tighter than your nanny's bedtime rules. If you were lucky, you understood your groom's name before your wedding day. If not, well, hopefully the translator was discreet. You might be playing in the palace nursery, chasing a wooden sheep across the tapestried floor, when a courtier gently informs you that you're now the Duchess of somewhere you've never heard of. Your dolly has been replaced by diplomatic documents. Your bedtime story tonight is a treaty. And it's not just you. Royals across Europe were routinely promised to one another as toddlers. The Habsburgs, for example, turned this into an Olympic sport. Little girls in ruffled collars were engaged to boys with names like Leopold or Maximilian while still in their cradle, sometimes to their own cousins, because why not keep the bloodlines thick and confusing? Here's your mainstream historical fact. Mary, Queen of Scots, was betrothed at just 6 months old to the infant son of Henry VIII. The proposed union was meant to bring Scotland and England together. Spoiler alert, it did not. Henry got mad, invaded Scotland, and started what became charmingly known as the rough wooing. You can't make this up. You're not immune to this madness. One morning, your governess helps you into a velvet gown with your new family's crest embroidered along the hemline. "Practice your curtsy," she says sweetly. "You'll be meeting your future husband's ambassador today." You're 7. He's 54, has a moustache like a hawk's wing and smells like pickled onions. You curtsy so hard your knees crack. The ambassador hands you a small token from your groom, a sapphire brooch perhaps, or a portrait the size of a playing card. The boy in the image looks like he's trying to hold in a sneeze. You smile and say thank you because no one's taught you the appropriate etiquette for receiving gifts from a fiancé who still sleeps with a wooden sword. Later that year, your family hosts a grand dinner to celebrate the betrothal. Peacocks roasted in their own feathers, minstrels playing lutes with alarming confidence. Somewhere between the 4th and 5th course, a toast is raised in your honour. You stand, curtsy again, and try not to trip on the tablecloth. You are now a diplomatic asset. You are also 9. And then silence. Sometimes after the initial flurry of fanfare years past, you write stiff little letters to your future husband, addressing him as "Most Noble Lord." You receive back drawings of dogs or smudgy attempts at cursive. You wait and wait. Meanwhile, your friends play tag in the courtyard, dream of romance, flirt with stable boys. You dream of not being a tool. Historians still argue whether these early betrothals were truly binding or more like political daydreams. Many were broken off. Some were swapped out last minute. Oops, we promised you to Prince A, but his brother's the new heir, so you'll marry him instead. Same bloodline, fewer freckles. And of course, some royal children died before the marriage could even happen. The Black Death didn't care about engagement contracts. Typhoid didn't care about dowries. 1 month you were preparing your trousseau. The next, your future in-laws were sending condolences and asking for their jewels back. It wasn't uncommon for girls to be re-betrothed 2, even 3 times before their actual wedding. Each time, a new country, a new set of in-laws, a new name to embroider on your handkerchiefs. It's like royal speed dating, but with plague and parchment instead of cocktails and awkward small talk. Quirky fact? Some royal children had official cradle visits from their future spouses' representatives, like an actual ceremony where a group of grim old men stands around a baby's bassinet, nodding seriously. Yes, excellent bone structure, good eye colour potential, we approve. There's a strange comfort in the consistency of it all. You begin to understand that love is a private luxury, like taking your corset off before dinner. Not forbidden, just highly unlikely. And so, you grow up a little faster, your letters grow more diplomatic, your gowns longer, your smiles more rehearsed. You begin to recognize courtly languages, the raised eyebrow of a jealous duchess, the icy glance of a disappointed aunt, the forced cheer in your father's voice when he says your wedding is a great triumph for the realm. You're 11, and you already know your heart will never belong to you alone again. You sit perfectly still as two men in fur-lined cloaks argue, quietly of course, about how many barrels of silver your hand is worth. They don't speak to you, they speak over you. You're 14 now, old enough to know that your dowry isn't just money, it's land, livestock, silks, spices, gold plate, a few aging castle ruins, and maybe, if they're feeling generous, your mother's prized falcon. Your marriage isn't a romance, it's a balance sheet. Dowries were the glittering chains that held royal marriages together, or strangled them. Behind every queen in pearls stood a small army of accountants, scribes, and very anxious uncles, all calculating how many warships could be purchased with her wedding chest. And when the chest arrived, everyone peeked inside. A mainstream historical fact here. Eleanor of Aquitaine's dowry included half of France. Half of France. That's not a typo. When she married Henry II of England, she didn't just bring a few trinkets. She delivered territory that made other monarchs weep into their maps. Suddenly, England owned more French land than the French king himself. You can imagine how well that went down at the next diplomatic summit. Your dowry might include something more symbolic, a relic from a saint's elbow, or a rare manuscript, or a tapestry woven by blind monks in the mountains. But most of the time it's cold, hard capital, the kind that starts wars, ends alliances, and funds absurdly large coronation banquets. And don't think it stops with your side of the bargain. Your groom comes with a mourning gift, a charmingly named tradition where the husband bestows something valuable upon his new wife the morning after consummation. Sounds romantic until you realize it's usually land, livestock, or political rights over a nearby province. Love, in royal terms, comes with receipts, but here's the catch. These gifts and dowries were rarely paid in full. Entire wars erupted because someone's cousin forgot to ship the silver or died in the middle of delivery. Your wedding might be celebrated with fanfare and feasting, but the real action happens afterward when the ledgers don't add up. Quirky tidbit. One Italian princess once had her dowry delivered in giant pasta wheels and bolts of satin embroidered with her face. Practical? No. Memorable? Absolutely. That marriage lasted 6 years and 3 minor rebellions. And if your family is poor but your bloodline is rich in prestige, you might still be sold off like a luxury antique. You are the vintage item they're using to trade up. Yes, we're broke, says your father, but look at her pedigree. Historians still argue whether dowries empowered royal women or chained them. On one hand, they gave queens financial leverage. On the other, they turned brides into investments, assets that needed to be guarded, spent wisely, and returned if defective. Yes, returned. If your marriage failed, your husband's family might demand the dowry back, preferably with interest. Imagine it. You're 28, exiled to a damp coastal monastery because your husband found a younger duchess with shinier hair. You're weeping quietly into your embroidery when a messenger arrives asking you to return the gold chalices and tapestries you brought to the wedding because technically you didn't fulfill your role as queen. You'd laugh, but there's a statute about that. Some families got around this awkwardness by writing extremely detailed marriage contracts, pages upon pages about what happens if the groom dies, if the bride is barren, if the crown falls into enemy hands, if a comet appears on the wedding night. All covered. Everything but love. And what if your kingdom is deeply in debt? Then your marriage becomes a last-ditch effort to stave off collapse. Picture it. Your treasury is empty. Your guards haven't been paid in months. The winter stores are gone. But your daughter? She's still young, attractive, and dynastically useful. So off she goes across frozen mountain passes, married to a 42-year-old baron with suspicious breath and a strong navy. And you, dear listener, are that daughter. Your mother squeezes your hand before you leave. She says something about duty and honor and doing what's best. She doesn't mention that your bride price might buy her a new estate with heated floors, You arrive in your new kingdom, greeted by people who pronounce your name wrong. They like your jewels. They wonder why you walk like someone raised on marble tiles. You smile, you curtsy, you try not to cry when they ask you how many gold plates you brought and whether the rumors about the missing sapphires are true. No pressure, but your dowry is supposed to fund the next military campaign. Better hope it impresses. Behind closed doors, the court gossips. She seems nice, but is she worth the debt we just inherited? Her embroidery is divine, but I hear her uncle once insulted our ambassador. Did you see the lace on her sleeves? French, obviously. In royal circles, no detail is too small to weaponize. You lie awake in your canopied bed that first night, staring at the silk ceiling. You wonder what your worth really is beyond jewels, land, and trade routes. The answer doesn't come, but sleep eventually does. Tomorrow, you'll tour the treasury. You'll meet the chancellor. You'll sit through an 8-hour sermon about divine union and national stability. You'll smile, you'll wave, and you'll wonder if the pastor dowry bride had it easier. You ride for days through unfamiliar hills, the sky a grey sheet above your caravan. The wind smells different here, saltier perhaps, or just lonelier. You've left your homeland behind with little ceremony. A few tears from your nursemaid, a reluctant wave from your younger brother. Your mother couldn't come. She had court obligations, which is code for she can't bear to watch you disappear into another kingdom. Your new life waits on the other side of the river. At the border, an actual line drawn in mud, marked by 2 rows of men in armour. You see the other party approaching, cloaks flapping, banners snapping, 2 entourages meeting like tides crashing from opposite shores. This is the bride swap. In royal marriages, brides were often exchanged in these cold, calculated ceremonies at neutral zones, bridges, riverbanks, desolate crossroads where you could still hear both nations' church bells. But neither claimed the land beneath your feet. It was all designed to prevent treachery or escape. A mainstream historical fact. Catherine de' Medici was married to the future King Henry II of France in 1533. Her transfer was so politically charged that she had to leave behind every single Italian servant, dress, trinket, and even her undergarments, because France wanted nothing foreign contaminating the future queen, not even her corset. You, too, are expected to shed everything from your old life, quite literally. Your chamber tent is erected in silence. Inside, a small army of attendants waits, none of whom speak your language. They gesture for you to remove your gown, then your petticoat, then your jewellery. One by one, they strip away every marker of your origin, folding it into velvet-lined boxes as though your past can be boxed up neatly. Then a new dress, embroidered with your new crest. Heavier, it fits poorly across the shoulders. It smells faintly of lavender and mothballs. A woman, maybe a lady-in-waiting, maybe a noble cousin you'll never see again, places a ring in your hand and murmurs a blessing. You nod, even though you don't understand a word. By the time you emerge from the tent, you're a new woman. Technically, you take your first step across the border, the way one might step off a cliff. Behind you, your old guards turn and leave without a word. Ahead, strangers cheer politely. You smile, it's not real joy, it's diplomacy with teeth, quirky tidbit. Some medieval ceremonies involved symbolic rebirths. A bride would pass through a specially constructed archway or a decorated gatehouse meant to symbolize the passage from one world into another. Some accounts even suggest the bride's name was changed during this moment, like shedding a skin. Goodbye, Maria. Hello, Marie. Historians still argue whether these rituals were empowering or humiliating. To some, they were theatrical affirmations of new beginnings. To others, they were thinly veiled acts of erasure. You weren't being welcomed, you were being rewritten. And if you thought you'd get a moment of privacy after all that, think again. The swap is usually followed by a welcome procession into your new realm, which sounds lovely until you realize it's 12 miles long, with peasants lining the road, priests offering blessings every 300 feet, and local lords inspecting your posture like your livestock on loan. You smile so much your jaw cramps. And your new husband? He might be waiting in the capital, or not. Sometimes the groom sends a representative, a cousin, a bishop, a trusted knight with dimples, to greet you on his behalf. You nod politely, though your stomach sinks. You've just crossed a kingdom for a man who couldn't even be bothered to show up for the handoff. The carriage smells of rosewater and pine, meant to cover the scent of stress. You sink into the cushions trying to memorize the landmarks, a crooked elm, a chapel made of pink stone, a cluster of geese scattering across a field. These are your new memories now. Your new kingdom buzzes with speculation. She's taller than expected. She doesn't curtsy like we do. Did you hear what happened to her last governess? Gossip blooms like mould in castle corners. You meet your future husband 3 days later. He enters the great hall with the confidence of someone who's never had to impress anyone. His boots gleam. His beard is slightly uneven. His expression says lukewarm admiration, which is actually better than you'd hoped. He bows stiffly. You curtsy perfectly. The court sighs with relief. No one wants a repeat of the last bride swap incident, where a Danish princess burst into tears and fled into the rose garden. It took 2 hours and a salted herring to coax her out. That night, you eat your first meal at the high table. You've been warned, chew softly, smile often, and don't touch your wine until the archbishop lifts his. You manage all three. Your new husband makes a joke about wild boar. You laugh. It's the right move, even if you didn't catch the punchline. When the banquet ends, you're escorted to your chambers, not to sleep, not quite yet. There's still one more ritual. You're undressed again, this time by strangers wearing gloves. They unpin your hair, remove your jewelry, and help you into a nightgown that smells like dried chamomile and expectations. The bed is enormous. You perch on the edge like an unsure cat. He arrives. You talk, awkwardly. He compliments your embroidery. You compliment his Latin. There's a moment, soft, tentative, where it almost feels human. But the walls have ears. Somewhere, someone is waiting to report whether the marriage has been officially sealed. You don't sleep much. In the morning, there's a silver tray by the door, a sweet bun, some milk, and a document waiting for your signature. The union is complete. You're no longer a guest. You belong here now. The candles flicker. The air is thick with perfume, sweat, and something else. Expectation. You sit on the edge of the bed again, but this time you're not alone. And you're really not alone. There are people in the room. Not servants changing sheets, not handmaidens bustling about with warm water or fresh linens. No, these are witnesses, priests, courtiers. Sometimes even your new in-laws hovering like ghosts with front-row seats. They have one job, to watch you climb into bed with your new spouse and confirm, preferably on parchment and with a nice wax seal, that the marriage has been consummated. And if you're thinking there's no way they actually watched it happen, oh, sweet summer child, sometimes they literally watched. Other times they waited just outside the chamber door, ears pressed to the stone like teenagers outside a tavern. It all depended on how much political tension was on the line, and if that marriage was meant to settle a centuries-old feud or secure a fragile truce. You'd better believe there were multiple witnesses and possibly a celebratory breakfast planned afterward. A mainstream historical fact. In France, the tradition of the bedding ceremony was so institutionalized that newlyweds were escorted to bed in front of a crowd. The curtains were drawn shut only after both bride and groom were tucked in, sometimes by bishops or kings themselves. Louis XV of France had his wedding bed closed by none other than Cardinal Richelieu. Nothing says romance like a clergyman fussing with your sheets. You're told to lie still, to smile demurely, to accept your duty. Meanwhile, your husband shifts beside you, clearly just as uncomfortable, unless he's already done this before, in which case he might be humming. Either way, the moment doesn't belong to you. It belongs to history. Because this isn't just about sealing a marriage, it's about sealing an alliance. If no one can confirm you slept together, someone, somewhere, will challenge your children's legitimacy. Years from now, in a smoky courtroom or on a battlefield, a general might raise a sword and shout, "This union was never properly sealed," and all because some baron didn't hear a creak from the wedding chamber. Quirky tidbit: in Scotland and parts of Scandinavia, it was common for a midwife to inspect the sheets the next morning and declare the marriage true. They were looking for blood, of course, a ridiculous, deeply flawed, and medically dubious tradition that assumed every bride was a virgin and that all virginity bled on cue. If nothing was found, well, accusations could fly faster than arrows. Historians still argue whether the bedding ceremonies were genuinely enforced in all courts or mostly ceremonial with a wink and a nod. Some records suggest couples were left alone after the formal procession, allowed a bit of dignity. Others, especially during times of succession crisis, were monitored down to the moment someone snuffed out the last candle. Tonight your chamber is heavy with that very scrutiny. Even the sheets feel politicized. Embroidered with gold thread, no doubt imported from the East and fluffed to near absurdity. You try not to wrinkle them as you shift. Your hair has been brushed 100 times. Your lips smell of rose oil. You've been told more than once to be gracious. Your husband says little. He looks at you sideways, unsure. Maybe he's nervous. Maybe this is just another ceremony to him. You wonder if he's thinking about the eyes just beyond the curtain, or if he's trying to remember which cousin you technically are. Because let's face it, there's a decent chance you're related. You make it through the night, somehow. You wake before dawn to the quiet clatter of a silver basin being placed on a side table. The servant doesn't meet your eye. A maid enters with folded linens. Someone else carries in a tray of boiled eggs and preserves, as if you might be hungry after all that statecraft. Then comes the paperwork. Yes, paperwork. A scribe arrives to record the event. He doesn't ask questions. He simply unrolls a scroll and writes, "The union between the most noble house of X and the revered lineage of Y has been fulfilled in accordance with holy right and sovereign decree." He dips the quill, blots it, signs it. You add your name last, your fingers trembling slightly as you take the pen. Congratulations. You're officially part of the royal ledger. You think you're free after that, but no, the real fun begins at the morning audience. You're expected to walk through the palace, radiant and a little flushed, nodding graciously as courtiers bow and whisper. "She looks pleased," someone murmurs. "Perhaps there will be heirs soon," another suggests. You pass a bishop who gives you a knowing smile. You pass a dowager countess who once accused a bride of lying about her consummation. You pass your new husband's younger sister who's watching you with open curiosity because next year she's being sent across the sea to marry some Spanish lord with gout. You give them all the same smile, the one that says, "Yes, I survived the most awkward night of my life. Please stop talking about it." Later, alone at last, you soak in a perfumed bath. You let your fingers trail across the water. You think about how something so personal, so private, could be reduced to documentation and whispers and political maneuvering. And you wonder what happens if the bedding didn't work. What if you can't bear children, or worse? What if you never wanted this in the first place? But for now, you dry your skin with linen towels embroidered with the royal crest, slip into yet another stiff gown, and prepare for your first full day as a wife, a duchess, and a very exhausted national security asset. It doesn't hit you right away, not during the vows, not even during the stiff breakfast where half the guests snuck in flasks and the other half kept calling you by the wrong title. No, it hits you 3 days into your new life as you're being fitted for your ceremonial robe for the 3rd time that morning, because the embroidery must represent both royal houses equally, and someone decided the peacocks on your left sleeve looked too Flemish. You haven't married a man, you've married a country. Your husband is just the human mascot, the velvet-wrapped vessel, the man whose signature and sperm were required, yes, but whose role in your fate pales compared to the web of ministers, advisors, dowagers and duchesses now pulling your strings like a harp at a royal concert. And the country? It has opinions. It watches how you walk, how you speak, Whether you eat your pheasant with the correct knife or, heaven forbid, ask for more salt at a feast, your laugh is dissected, your handwriting analysed, your gestures catalogued in the court gossip scrolls. You once scratched your nose during a procession and sparked a 3-day debate over whether it was a subtle insult to the High Chamberlain's wife, a mainstream historical fact. When Marie Antoinette first arrived in France, she was greeted not as a person, but as a diplomatic triumph. The French court immediately set about moulding her into their version of a queen, teaching her new manners, new posture, even a new smile. She was forbidden to bring her beloved pug, a dog. Too Austrian, they said, could corrupt the bloodline. You're expected to be both present and invisible, regal but not intimidating, fertile but discreet, educated but never correct someone in public. A bridge between two cultures, but also a mirror reflecting only the flattering parts of each. It's like being a painting, pretty but flat, and always hanging in someone else's hallway. You try to engage, you ask a noblewoman about local poetry. She blinks twice and says, "That's not appropriate breakfast conversation." You compliment a visiting bishop's sermon and are told to let the king do the praising. You suggest adding lavender to the rose gardens and are met with a silent look that lasts a full minute. Eventually you start suggesting less. A quirky tidbit for you: Queen Isabella of Portugal, wife of Charles V, ruled the Spanish Netherlands as regent while he was away for years at a time, and she did it well. But she also had to wear black for almost her entire adult life, because her husband preferred it. Some historians speculate she may have eventually liked the colour. Others think she just liked surviving. Historians still argue whether royal wives had any real power, or were just symbolic placeholders. Sure, some wielded influence, through back channels, through subtlety, through marriage alliances and pillow talk. But it always depended on whether the country approved, because even if your husband adored you, if the nobles thought you talked too much at dinner, you could end up exiled to a damp estate filled with geese and regret. The hardest part isn't the pressure, it's the loneliness. The way everyone speaks to you in perfect sentences, the way no one ever really answers your questions, the way you sit in a banquet hall full of laughter and feel like a statue someone forgot to dust. Your ladies-in-waiting were chosen for their loyalty to the crown, not to you. They smile like professionals. Their gossip is choreographed. One of them plays the lute badly, and you're not allowed to ask her to stop. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of early morning, you whisper to yourself in your mother tongue, just to remember what it sounds like. Just to remember that you were someone before you became the Duchess of wherever this is. There's comfort in routines, in the slow, measured pace of royal life, the early walk through the dew-laced gardens, the mid-morning audience where old men argue about grain tariffs, the embroidery hour where you stitch lilies into a linen square you'll never see again. But even comfort can feel like a trap when you realize your life is now a series of performative gestures for people who only want to see what they expect. The country has claimed you, and you've started to disappear into it. You don't talk back anymore. You don't ask where the salted butter went. You don't correct the ambassador when he misquotes your homeland's motto. You do what queens are meant to do: nod gracefully, smile diplomatically, sit upright even when you want to collapse, because every sigh, every frown, every choice you make can ripple out like a stone tossed into a shallow pond. Unintended consequences, unexpected gossip, and sometimes unwanted war. And your husband? He means well, you think. You have dinner together twice a week. Sometimes he asks about your falconry lessons. Sometimes he falls asleep mid-toast. But you know the truth now. You've wed more than a man. You've wed an entire political entity. And it snores. You wake up before the sun, the sky still the colour of old parchment. The bed beside you is empty. Your husband is off inspecting fortifications or praying with monks or possibly just hiding from breakfast. You stretch in silence, already bracing yourself for the hardest part of your day: conversation. Your ladies-in-waiting bustle in, murmuring in your new court's language, an elegant, curling tongue with too many vowels and impossible grammar. You understand maybe one word in 5. You think one of them just asked whether you'd like mulled wine or honey tea, but it might also have been about whether you believe in dragons. You nod. The tea is excellent. Royal marriages across borders weren't just cultural mashups, they were linguistic minefields. You're expected to attend councils, host visiting dignitaries, and smile politely through sermons, sonnets, and speeches you can't actually comprehend. You become a master at strategic nodding. You laugh when others laugh. You frown when the bishop frowns. You're fluent in vibe. Mainstream historical fact: Anne of Cleves arrived in England in 1539, speaking little to no English. Henry VIII, disappointed in her appearance and unable to charm her in German, annulled the marriage in less than a year. She survived the whole affair quite well, outlived Henry, got a nice pension, and was never beheaded so honestly. One of the better endings, but you're still in the thick of it. The court poet presents you with a sonnet he wrote in your honour. You smile. It's in the local language, and you have no idea if it's about your beauty or your bowel movements. You say, lovely, and hope for the best. You try to learn, of course. There are tutors, flashcards, one kindly steward who mimes things like goose and tax reform until your head spins. But it's slow, frustrating work, and half the time you're too exhausted from pretending to understand things to actually study them. Mealtimes become performances. You sit at the high table, surrounded by noblemen debating wheat tariffs, while you try to figure out whether Plonchevik means harvest or a very specific kind of insult. You once accidentally agreed that the new abbess was shaped like a root vegetable. The abbess has not spoken to you since. Your husband, fluent in 3 languages but conversational in none, is no help. He mumbles through state dinners, responds to your questions with shrugs or indeed, and occasionally speaks to you in Latin when he wants to seem intellectual. You respond with gratia and hope he was complimenting your gown and not asking about troop movements. Quirky tidbit: in 17th century Russia, a foreign bride once brought her own translator to bed. Yes, bed. She and her husband couldn't understand a word of each other's moans, so a third party was hired to interpret. The translator sat behind a curtain and whispered helpful phrases like, "She says your beard is nice," and "he would like you to turn slightly." Historians still argue whether language barriers helped or hindered royal marriages. Some say it kept the peace. After all, you can't argue with your spouse if you don't understand them. Others argue it created dangerous silences where misunderstandings bred resentment and false assumptions ruled every interaction. You feel that tension daily. One evening your husband gifts you a rare book. It's bound in dark leather, hand-painted. You open it with delight, only to find it's written in the old dialect of a nearby duchy. You thank him anyway, smile brightly, and spend the rest of the evening pretending to read it upside down. He seems pleased. Eventually you find solace in the universal language of not talking. You take long walks in the garden. You ride your horse through the orchard, where the trees don't demand answers. You take to embroidery, floral patterns mostly. Once, you stitched a whole conversation into a sleeve. No one noticed. You do have one ally. A kitchen maid with a crooked smile who speaks a little of your language, badly but earnestly. She teaches you the local word for rain, for home, for enough. She teaches you to swear like a fisherman and says it's tradition. You laugh until your stomach aches. It's the first time in weeks you've laughed without rehearsing. Then there's the political bedtime. No, not the bedroom. You've figured that part out, mostly. This is bedtime, as in the part of the evening when you must pretend to be interested in 3-hour theological debates hosted in candlelit halls with terrible acoustics. You sit back straight while old men argue about saints and taxes. Someone will inevitably ask your opinion. You smile and say something vague like, "Harmony is best achieved through balance." They all nod as if you've said something profound. And that becomes your greatest weapon: vagueness. You learn to speak without speaking. You say perhaps when you mean absolutely not. You say fascinating when you mean I'm going to scream into a pillow later. You say, we should consider all sides, and it somehow becomes royal policy by morning. You dream in your old language and wake in a place where you're never quite sure if the dream ended, but you endure, because silence has power, because smiles can be sharp, and because someday, when the time is right, your words, halting, accented, but fully your own, will carry weight enough to shift policy, sway opinions, and perhaps even save your life. Just not yet. You're sitting at a banquet, nibbling delicately at a rose-glazed fig, when it occurs to you that at least 3 people in the room are your cousins. One of them might also be your brother-in-law, possibly both. You've lost track. The tapestry behind you depicts the family tree of your new house. It climbs skyward in gold thread, branching and curling like ivy, but if you look closely, you'll notice something odd. The branches loop back on themselves. Some names appear more than once, others are disturbingly close together. It doesn't look like a tree at all, it looks like a knot. Welcome to royal inbreeding, where love matches take a back seat to strategic genetic folding. Marrying your cousin, perfectly acceptable. Marrying your uncle's daughter, even better. The closer the blood, the stronger the claim. Never mind what it does to the jaw lines, the eyesight, or the general tendency toward gout and melancholia. You're not breeding for health, you're breeding for continuity. Mainstream historical fact. Charles II of Spain was the unfortunate poster child for royal inbreeding. Descended from generations of uncle-niece and cousin-cousin pairings, his family tree was so entangled that his pedigree chart looks more like a spider's web than a lineage. He had mandibular prognathism so severe he couldn't properly chew food, and mental development delayed well into adulthood. And yet, he was king. The logic was simple. Don't dilute the blood. Royalty must stay royal. If you start marrying commoners or foreigners with unvetted ancestry, who knows what might sneak in? Intelligence, empathy, a working pancreas? Too risky. So instead, you marry within the circle, sometimes uncomfortably within. You once attended a betrothal feast where the bride and groom were so closely related they shared a grandmother. Everyone knew, no one blinked. The cake was excellent, quirky tidbit. In the Habsburg dynasty, it became a point of pride to trace multiple lines of ancestry back to the same ancestor, usually some particularly imperial-sounding fellow with a beard that looked like a bird's nest. Some brides could point to their new husbands and say, "He's my cousin on 3 sides," which is a sentence. Historians still argue whether monarchs understood the genetic consequences or were simply ignoring them. By the 18th century, the term Habsburg jaw wasn't just whispered gossip, it was sketched in court paintings. And still, the marriages kept circling the same gene pool like ducks in a shrinking pond. You feel it even now at court, that faint tension when you meet a new noble and realize you share an ancestor. That sideways glance from the dowager who's trying to recall whether your great-uncle once married her niece or her goat. You attend baptisms where everyone in the room has the same nose. And if the heir has a limp, or the princess faints too often, or the third son insists he can hear angels in the curtains, it's quietly noted, quietly accepted, quietly ignored. Your own children will carry this legacy, of course. You've been encouraged, more than encouraged, to keep the line pure. The council once gave you a list of approved marriage partners for your daughter. 6 names. 4 were first cousins. 1 was still teething. You considered framing it as a joke. You didn't. You begin to notice how this insularity bleeds into everything. The advisors all share surnames. The court painters depict everyone with the same waxen complexion. The royal dogs have started to look related. You asked once, only once, about marrying outside the circle, maybe to someone from a noble but unrelated house. The silence that followed was so long, you heard the clock ticking. Then a stern-faced minister cleared his throat and said, "The blood is the realm. Dilution invites collapse." You didn't ask again, and so the tree continues to curl inward. You imagine it sometimes, your children marrying their cousins, who marry their cousins, who marry their cousins, until the family tree becomes a family loop, a gilded Ouroboros. royalty devouring itself in the name of tradition. Sometimes you catch yourself studying your husband's face. The same sharp cheekbones as your aunt, the same slope to the brow as your grandfather. You wonder whether he sees the resemblance too, whether he ever looks at your children and sees ghosts of siblings past. At night, in the quiet, you remember simpler things. Markets in your childhood city, smells of saffron and roasted almonds, laughter that didn't come with courtly etiquette, names that weren't shared by 10 cousins, blood that didn't trace back to the same 5 ancestors. And then morning comes, and the game resumes. Another banquet, another introduction, another cousin. You smile, you toast. You tuck your curiosity into the folds of your gown, alongside the lace handkerchief embroidered with your own family crest, stitched next to your husband's. They're the same. Of course they are. You raise a goblet of spiced wine to your lips, then pause, just for a heartbeat. Not long enough for anyone to notice, but long enough for your eyes to sweep the room, to meet the steely gaze of the steward, the polite half-smile of the ambassador from the east, the too casual glance of your new husband's second cousin, who never drinks yet always insists on filling your cup. You sip. It's fine. Not poisoned, probably. This is what honeymoon looks like when you marry into power. Parades and pageants by day, shadows and suspicions by night. You ride through cheering crowds in open carriages. You wave to children tossing flowers. You share sweetmeats in silk-draped pavilions while musicians pluck gentle tunes. And every so often someone dies. That's not a metaphor, it's a pattern. Mainstream historical fact. Lucrezia Borgia's weddings were followed, more than once, by untimely and suspicious deaths. Her second husband was strangled, her third was poisoned, or stabbed, or both, depending on who you ask. And while historians debate how involved Lucrezia herself was, the real takeaway is this. In some royal circles, a wedding feast was just the prologue to an assassination. Because weddings were opportunities, so many people gathered in one place, so many political enemies drinking the same wine, so many heirs seated in convenient proximity to balconies, staircases, and open windows. It was like ringing the dinner bell for dynastic mayhem. You've already heard the rumours. One lady-in-waiting slipped on a staircase. Conveniently, the morning after, you publicly complimented her family's rivals. A footman vanished after mishandling your new sapphire comb. And just yesterday, a gift of candied violets arrived with no note. You fed one to a pigeon. It stopped flying mid-air. Quirky tidbit. In Renaissance courts, it was common for brides to travel with their own food tasters. A discreet young man, usually handsome enough to blend in, trained to taste, sniff, and occasionally survive all manner of toxins. You're assigned one. He's 17. His name is Jacques. You call him just in case. Historians still argue whether poison was as prevalent as legends suggest, or simply the default explanation for every royal headache. Some say chronic illnesses were mistaken for poisoning. Others say poisoning was mistaken for chronic illness. Either way, everyone agrees it's better to dine suspiciously than not at all. Your husband is no stranger to this world. You see how he handles his meals, always waiting for you to drink first, always eyeing the wine like it owes him money. He talks casually about former cousins who fell ill after the coronation or died peacefully during dessert. You've both seen the same play too many times to be surprised when the musicians strike a slightly sour note and a duke slumps forward into his pheasant. Even your bedchamber isn't sacred. The first night of your honeymoon, the mattress was inspected by 3 guards, 1 chaplain, and a small dog trained to sniff for powdered toxins. The canopy was shaken, the drapes steamed. Your bath water was poured fresh while you watched, because no one trusts a steward who whistles. The room looked romantic with its gold threadwork and rose-scented air, but romance had nothing to do with it. And yet, life continues. You attend garden strolls where courtiers play flirtation like a blood sport. You learn to tell which floral arrangements mean welcome and which mean watch your back. You accept a carved ivory mirror from the Dowager Duchess, then store it in a locked drawer after hearing that her last gift turned a baroness's hair green. You pretend not to notice when your handmaid swaps your slippers every morning, just in case. Your wedding gifts include silk gowns, diamond pins, and at least 2 pieces of good luck jewelry with compartments deep enough to hold powdered arsenic. You thank each giver graciously, then pass the items to your taster, who mutters things like "suspicious hinge" and "smells like almonds." The worst part isn't the danger, it's the performance. Every day you must look serene, confident, blissfully in love, because if you flinch at the wrong moment, if you hesitate over a cup, or smile too long at a foreign envoy, someone will notice, and noticing leads to whispering, and whispering leads to plots. You learn to make eye contact while scanning for exits. You learn to dance while counting daggers. You learn that honeymoon doesn't mean rest, it means surveillance wrapped in velvet. At least once a week, someone approaches you under the guise of just chatting and casually asks about your future children, not because they care, but because they want to know who you'll side with when the next civil war comes knocking. You once dropped a spoon during supper. 3 people assumed it was a signal, and yet amid the tension and veiled threats, there's a strange thrill in surviving. Each day you wake up unpoisoned feels like a tiny victory. Each smile you deliver with just the right amount of warmth and detachment becomes a silent triumph. You haven't been outmaneuvered yet. One evening, while standing in a candlelit hall lined with portraits of dead kings, some smiling, some scowling, you catch your reflection in a suit of armor. You barely recognize yourself. Your gown glows, your crown sits steady, your eyes no longer scan in panic. They scan in strategy. You're not a bride anymore, you're a player, and every sip, every glance, every breath you take under that gilded ceiling, it's a move. The throne room echoes with the sound of someone else's footsteps, not yours, never yours. You're seated on a velvet-upholstered chair, near but not on the dais, close enough to be noticed, far enough to be excluded. Your husband occupies the seat of power. You occupy the space of decorum. You smile, you nod. You do not speak unless spoken to. You are queen in name, but not in deed. Because here's the secret they never write in the fairy tales. Royal wives were rarely given actual power, influence perhaps, proximity, access, but power. That remained locked behind the carved oak doors of the king's council chamber, where you, conveniently, were never invited. And yet, when things go wrong, it's your fault. The weather, your fault. A poor harvest, clearly your bloodline. Political unrest, they say you whisper too much in the king's ear. They say you curse his mind, that your womb has altered his judgment, that your homeland has poisoned his rule, that the kingdom was better off before you brought your silks, your herbs, your suspicious foreign ways. A mainstream historical fact. Marie Antoinette was blamed for nearly everything that went wrong in France during the lead-up to the Revolution. She was accused of bankrupting the state with frivolous spending, orchestrating secret alliances, and being a sexual deviant, all before breakfast. The infamous, "let them eat cake"? She never said it. But she still got the guillotine. You begin to notice how blame circulates like perfume, light, invisible, but impossible to ignore. The ministers argue it's because you asked about taxes, the price of grain spikes. It's your new embroidery budget. Your husband skips a feast, must be a lover's quarrel with his foreign queen. You learn to sit very still because queens who move too boldly invite attention, and attention in a royal court is like standing under a magnifying glass on a sunny day. Quirky tidbit? In some medieval courts, queens were held legally responsible for the king's missteps. If the monarch issued an unpopular decree, it wasn't uncommon for nobles to demand a public rebuke of the queen, as though scolding a woman could reverse a war. There are records of queens being ordered to apologize for their husband's military losses. Imagine being told to say sorry because your spouse lost a naval battle. Historians still argue whether royal consorts were victims or tacticians. Some say they were scapegoats, sacrificed to preserve the king's image. Others claim they thrived in their limitations, manipulating power from behind lace fans and heavy curtains. The truth is likely both, and neither. You sit through yet another court ceremony, something about awarding land to a duke whose ancestors once insulted your ancestors. You smile. The court watches. Your new hair ornament is too Eastern, they say. Your gown's neckline is too modern. Your silence is too calculated. Your words are too bold, and still they come to you in secret. Ministers who refuse to look you in the eye in public will send you folded notes at midnight, requests for favors, warnings, advice. The same men who call you powerless by day will beg for your opinion under candlelight, but never openly, because to admit the Queen has power is to admit the King shares it. Your husband doesn't know how to protect you from the whispers. He likes you. He even respects you. But affection doesn't translate to intervention, not in this world. Instead, he tells you to keep your head down, to let the court tire itself out, as though gossip has an expiration date and not a guillotine. You turn to charity. It's one of the few acceptable ways to assert yourself. You sponsor orphanages, you endow music schools, you commission sacred art, all of it under your name, all of it calculated to remind the people you exist, you care. But if the treasury dips, they say you gave too much. If the opera performs poorly, they say you funded the wrong composer. If the palace catches fire, somehow it's your hair oil that's blamed. And when the kingdom truly begins to falter, plagues, famine, rebellion, you become the natural enemy. Not the policies, not the generals, you. Because you are foreign, because you are woman, because you are here. And yet you survive, with grace, with patience, with an ever-growing collection of masks. You smile when accused. You blink slowly when confronted. You deny nothing but admit even less. You walk daily through the gardens, knowing full well that some of the people bowing are planning your fall. And you wonder quietly, bitterly, how many queens before you walked these same paths, thinking the same thoughts. And how many more will come after, wearing borrowed crowns and bearing all the blame. You hear her before you ever see her. Laughter, faint and bright, drifting through the marble corridor like perfume. It floats past your chamber door while you're being laced into a gown that weighs more than most children. Your maid hesitates, just briefly, then pulls the stays tighter. You don't ask who she is, you already know. Every queen eventually meets the other woman, or women, or the rotation, as some courtiers call it, behind their fans. In the royal world, mistresses aren't just tolerated, they're expected, sometimes celebrated, occasionally knighted. Your marriage may be the foundation of peace between two kingdoms, but his affections, those can be outsourced. At least one royal adviser once told you delicately, "Your Majesty's strength lies in her dignity, not in her husband's attentions." A lovely way to say, don't ask why he smells like gardenias at dawn. Mainstream historical fact. King Louis XV of France had so many mistresses that he built them their own private apartments inside Versailles. Madame de Pompadour, the most famous among them, wielded political influence for decades, arranging alliances, commissioning artists, even shaping foreign policy. She wasn't a scandal, she was an institution. Your own husband is more discreet or just lazier. He prefers the same 2 or 3 women, rotating them like state banners. Each one is given a modest estate, an allowance, and a seat near the dais, but never too close to yours. You once shared a carriage ride with one, a winter festival in the countryside. She wore fox fur and a smug little smile. She complimented your earrings. You complimented her survival instincts. Neither of you blinked. Quirky tidbit? Some queens became friends with their husbands' mistresses, not out of affection, out of strategy. Better to keep your enemies close, your rivals in satin, and the gossip controlled. One archduchess reportedly exchanged beauty tips with her competition while negotiating over seating charts. Historians still argue whether royal mistresses destabilized monarchies or merely made them functional. Some became power players in their own right. Others were pawns. A few disappeared under mysterious circumstances involving cliffs and quiet guards. But you live in their shadow. And that shadow, unfortunately, stretches into your bedchamber. Your husband still visits you, of course. Regularly, even. But there's a script to it. Perfumed letters, predictable timing, a knock at the door that sounds more like obligation than desire. You lie still, let him speak of court gossip, nod politely as he compares your hair to moonlight, then corrects himself and says, "Sunlight." You smile. And when he falls asleep, you stare at the ceiling, wondering who will warm his hands tomorrow night. The court tracks these visits, you know, not officially. But if you trip on your hem walking into a feast, 3 noblewomen will whisper, "She's distracted." If you look flushed, a steward will assume there's a pregnancy. If you're pale, someone will summon the apothecary and suggest a cleansing tonic. Because a queen's worth is measured not in affection, but in output. Sons, preferably multiple. Daughters only if they can be married off like decorative treaties. Your first pregnancy was met with bells and parades. Your second with polite applause. Your third, a miscarriage, was met with murmurs. "She's fragile," they said. "Too much embroidery," someone offered. "Perhaps the mistresses should rest," someone else suggested, without irony. One day, a young boy is brought to court. He has your husband's chin and your handmaid's colouring. The resemblance is undeniable. He's given a room near the nursery, tutors, fencing lessons, a page who follows him around like a shadow. No one tells you who he is, but they don't need to. You greet him kindly. You remember his name. You send him a book of prayers with your crest pressed into the wax. You are, after all, dignified. Another time, a teenage girl appears at a banquet, introduced only as Lady Annette of the Western Valley. Her hair is like your husband's when it curls, damp with sweat after a ride. She curtsies. You curtsy back. And you wonder, what is the word for a family built in silence? You receive letters sometimes, unsigned, scented, folded in strange ways. Warnings, confessions, apologies, you burn them without reading. There's no point. You know what they'll say. You know how the game is played. You keep your dignity, your schedule, your morning walks, your correspondence with a bohemian duchess who once wrote, "When we wed, they said we'd rule beside them. They forgot to mention it would be from the next room." You consider writing back, or beneath another woman, but you don't. You stay the course. Because eventually, the mistresses age, they retire, they fade. The side palaces become guest houses. The bastard sons are married off to obscure heiresses. The daughters vanish into convents with suspiciously large dowries. Time passes, beauty fades, but you're still queen, still signing letters, still sitting at the high table, still smiling at women who wear your husband's perfume. And when the historians write of your reign, they will use words like elegant, enduring, and enigmatic. They'll say you stood tall through scandal and storm. They'll mention your charities, your architecture, your gentle influence over diplomatic affairs. They'll forget the nights you cried alone, the glances that lingered, the silences that screamed, and maybe that's the best you can hope for. You're sitting beneath a stained glass window, listening to 3 bishops argue in low Latin. They're not arguing about theology or war or famine. They're arguing about you. Or more precisely, whether your marriage should be declared invalid, retroactively, publicly, internationally. Welcome to the papal annulment circus. You always suspected something was coming. The colder glances from your husband, the way he stopped sending you roses, the sudden flurry of visits from lawyers dressed like monks. When he stopped attending morning prayers with you, you knew. And now here you are, watching your life be debated like a property line dispute. A mainstream historical fact. Henry VIII spent nearly a decade trying to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, not because of hatred, not even entirely because of love for Anne Boleyn. It was about heirs, about politics, about whether a king could admit he was wrong without looking weak. The Pope refused, so Henry left the Catholic Church entirely and started his own, the Church of England. That's how messy royal annulments could get. You're not quite there yet, but you are being measured. They say your marriage was invalid because you were too closely related, even though everyone knew that at the time. They say the union was never properly consummated, despite 3 children, 2 of whom can recite family histories backward. Your husband, of course, is being very reasonable. He doesn't want to hurt you, he says. He's just seeking spiritual clarity. He's concerned for the realm. He says he'll grant you a generous pension, a quiet estate, somewhere with lavender fields. You try not to scream. Quirky tidbit? Medieval and Renaissance courts hired professional marriage memory testers, servants or midwives who'd been present at the wedding night, and were now asked, sometimes years later, to testify whether the couple had seemed satisfied. If you ever wanted a career in gossip, this was it. Historians still argue whether annulments were ever about religion. Spoiler, they weren't. They were political knives disguised as prayer books, used to cut ties, redirect alliances, or clear the way for a younger, shinier bride. Sometimes annulments were mutual. 2 people who'd never spoken outside of banquets deciding, over wine and indifference, to move on. More often they were humiliating, one-sided affairs that required the queen to admit, publicly, that she was either infertile, impure, or too closely related to her own husband to count. All 3 options felt like choosing between different flavors of exile. You're called to testify, not before a court, before a panel of men, most of whom you've met at dances, one of whom once spilled soup on your slipper. They ask you when your wedding night occurred, whether you bled, whether he did, whether the lights were on, whether you consented, whether you enjoyed it. You smile. You say as little as possible. Your dignity is still yours for now. Your allies shrink. Your ladies-in-waiting grow quiet. The court whispers louder. One day you walk into the chapel and notice your prayer cushion is missing. Another day you find your portrait has been moved from the hall. No one says why. They don't need to. You begin to write letters to your family, to the Pope, to other queens who've survived this before you. Some reply with sympathy, others with scripture, a few with passive-aggressive poetry. One simply writes, "If he takes the ring from your finger, keep the finger." You smile at that one. Then the verdict arrives. The Pope sends a messenger in crimson robes. The scroll is sealed in gold. You are no longer queen. Your marriage is no longer valid. Your children? Still legitimate this time, but only because declaring otherwise would cause civil war. Probably. Maybe. Your husband is already preparing to marry again. The new bride is young, meek, and fluent in 2 languages. She curtsies so low she practically tunnels into the floor. She smiles at you once, briefly, apologetically. You do not smile back. You are offered a choice: retire quietly to an estate near the mountains, or remain at court as a guest of the crown, which is code for a ghost who still takes up space. You choose exile because the mountains are quiet. The lavender does grow thick there, and because you're tired of pretending not to see the trap doors beneath the velvet carpets. The ride is long, the road muddy, but you feel something stir in you as the palace disappears behind the hills. Not peace, exactly, but a kind of freedom. You still receive letters, news from court. The new queen has had a stillbirth. The nobles are fighting over land again. Your former husband is growing tired. The bishops are divided. Someone writes that your old portrait has been quietly restored to the hall. And you smile, because while queens may be annulled, dismissed, erased, history has a longer memory than most men. The carriage rocks over uneven cobblestones as you pass under the heavy stone arch of your new city. Crowds press in, their faces tense, their applause thin. You wave gracefully, deliberately, knowing full well that many here would rather see your head on a spike than your hand on their prince. You are not just foreign, you are the enemy, or rather, you were. Until the treaty, until the signatures, until the wedding bells rang over fields still echoing with the clamour of war. You are now the bridge between bloodshed and truce. Welcome to marrying into enemies, where every smile is a gamble and every toast is a test. Your wedding was the final clause in a peace agreement signed under duress. a marriage inked in the shadow of siege towers and siege debt. The castle halls still smell faintly of smoke. The paint on the murals is fresh enough to drip. Your father called it a brilliant diplomatic solution. Your mother wept for 3 days, a mainstream historical fact. Margaret Tudor, sister to Henry VIII, was married to James IV of Scotland in 1503 to cement peace between England and Scotland. Just 10 years later, James was killed in battle fighting the English, and the treaty crumbled with his body. So much for marital diplomacy. You live in the very halls once attacked by your uncle's army. The guards outside your door once held pikes against your countrymen. Your ladies-in-waiting whisper in a tongue that still feels like a threat. The air is polite and icy. Every day is an audition. At court, you are watched more closely than the royal treasury. They track your expressions, your loyalties, your lunch choices. You once refused the fish stew, and someone decided it was a statement against the fishing tariffs of the western coast. You now eat the stew every Friday, even when it smells like wet parchment. And the Queen Mother? She has a smile like a crossbow. She compliments your embroidery while correcting your grammar. She invites you to walk through the gardens, then asks, "How does your country celebrate harvest?" Assuming there's anything left to harvest after last spring, you chuckle lightly, then plan your next move. Quirky tidbit? In Byzantine diplomacy, it was common to marry enemy princesses and assign them spies as chambermaids. These women reported daily to the emperor, sharing every sigh, complaint, or coded letter the foreign bride might utter. Royal marriage and espionage, inseparable for centuries. Historians still argue whether these peace marriages worked. Some did stabilize fragile truces briefly, others merely postponed war until after the first child was born. The success rate hovers somewhere between worth a try and good luck with that. You learn to speak carefully. You praise your new homeland publicly, even as the architecture makes you miss your own cities, sun-drenched towers. You flatter the scholars here, even though your father's court prized philosophy over swordplay. You accept the local religious customs, even the one where you must kiss the bishop's ring 3 times while kneeling on imported sand. Your husband tries to help. He assures you that the people just need time, that marrying you was his idea, that his advisors opposed it, but he believed in peace. He says this as he sharpens a dagger, for hunting, probably. And yet there are moments you attend a feast where a drunk noble tries to recite one of your homeland's poems. He stumbles over the words, but the effort is sincere. You thank him. The next day, someone sends you a translation of your favorite verse, handwritten in delicate script. Another day, a small girl bows to you in the corridor and calls you our queen. Not the foreign queen, just queen. It's not love, not yet. But it's something. You find your rhythm. You introduce a style of calligraphy that becomes fashionable. You sponsor a music festival featuring both nations' composers. You start a library with bilingual texts and open it to the children of both armies. You write home less often, not because you forget, but because you begin to belong, until the border flares again. A minor skirmish, a misplaced tax, a raid gone too far. Whatever the cause, it reaches your court with breathless urgency. The nobles stir. The banners are pulled from their storage chests. Your husband grows quiet. The Queen Mother starts attending council meetings again. And the whispers return. Whose side are you on? Will you pass messages to your old homeland? Have you been loyal enough? You wake to find your handmaid gone. Transferred, they say, your guards doubled, your letters opened. You are not a wife now. You are a suspect. You sit at your writing desk and draft a letter to your father. Carefully, neutrally, diplomatically. You do not mention troop movements. You do not mention fear. You simply say, I remain faithful to peace. But you wonder if that's enough. In the days that follow, you wear more jewels, you smile harder, you attend the chapel 3 times a day. And when a general kneels before you and asks if you support the coming campaign, you say, I serve this kingdom with all that I am. It's true and not, because even now, deep in your heart, you carry the memory of your homeland's anthem, the scent of pine smoke in autumn, the way your brother used to throw bread to the swans on the lake. And if war comes again, you will weep in private and wear crimson in public and pray the history books call you peacemaker, not traitor. You stand in a chapel that's not your own, wearing a dress tailored by people you've never met in a kingdom you've never seen, and you say your vows to a man who isn't there. He sent a sword instead. No, really, a sword. That's how proxy weddings work. When two royal houses must unite, but distance, danger, or diplomacy prevents the groom from showing up, they send a stand-in, a brother, a cousin, a trusted knight, or, occasionally, an inanimate object like a ring, glove, or ceremonial sword. You marry that in front of witnesses and boom, you're legally a wife. You just haven't met your husband yet. A mainstream historical fact. In 1496, Joanna of Castile was married to Philip the Handsome of Burgundy by proxy in a grand ceremony in Spain. A nobleman stood in for Philip and the marriage was declared valid. She met her real husband months later and reportedly fell for him hard. Sadly, the feeling wasn't mutual and things went downhill faster than a runaway carriage. Your own ceremony features a velvet-draped chair where your future husband would be sitting if he hadn't been called to battle, or trapped by politics, or perhaps just didn't feel like making the journey. In his place stands his cousin, Lord Something or Other, trying not to sweat through his brocade doublet as he repeats vows meant for someone else. You take the stand-in's hand, you say the words, you bow to the relics, kiss the parchment, and try not to dwell on the fact that your first act as a wife is to pledge yourself to a stranger by proxy. Quirky tidbit? Marie de Medici was married by proxy to King Henry IV of France in 1600. The Archbishop stood in as the groom. During the ceremony, the stand-in actually climbed into bed with the bride, fully clothed and with a crowd watching, to symbolize the consummation. Now that is dedication to a metaphor. Historians still argue whether proxy marriages truly counted as binding. Legally, yes. Spiritually, depends who you asked. Practically, not always. Some couples had their unions annulled before ever meeting. Others never lived together at all. A few met years later and couldn't even recognize one another. You spend the evening of your wedding drinking wine in a foreign bedchamber, surrounded by gifts you didn't pick, flowers you don't recognize, and ladies in waiting who ask if you're excited to finally meet your beloved. You smile, because what else is there to do? Weeks pass, or is it months? The calendar blurs. You receive letters from your husband, stiff, formal, likely penned by his secretary. They mention political conditions, weather, and once, rather boldly, how eager he is to honour our vows properly. You read that one twice. The court prepares for his arrival. Your dresses are fitted, the halls cleaned, new tapestries hung. The kitchen staff panics about which sauces are fashionable in his court. A special cushion is made for him to kneel on at your formal presentation. And you practice your curtsy. You study his portrait like it holds secret truths. He's handsome, allegedly, but court painters are known to be generous. You once saw a depiction of a duke with 6 chins look positively noble. The day comes, trumpets blare, banners flutter. The entire city smells of roasted almonds and ambition. Your heart thumps as his entourage arrives. Dozens of horses, glinting armour, velvet banners bearing your new crest. And then, there he is. Your husband, your real husband. He dismounts with the ease of a man used to being admired. His cloak swirls just so, his boots shine, his hair curls at the edge of his crown. He looks around and his eyes find you. He smiles, and you realize in a wave of stunned relief that he's not horrible. He might even be charming. The court exhales, the bishops beam, the chamber orchestra strikes up a triumphant tune. The city bell tower rings as if the marriage just actually happened. In a way it has. He greets you with a bow, not too deep, not grovelling, but respectful. He takes your hand, kisses it, and says, "Wife." The crowd sighs. You reply, "Husband." And just like that, the paper marriage becomes flesh. But don't get too comfortable, because even now the court watches. Your reactions will be judged. If you smile too much, you're naive. If you're cold, you're haughty. If you whisper in his ear, you're manipulative. If you don't, you're frigid. The wedding may be over, but the performance never ends. Later that night, in the privacy of your chamber, you sit together, finally alone. The fire crackles. He pours wine into crystal glasses and asks, "Was the ceremony what you imagined?" You pause and you tell the truth. "I didn't imagine it." He nods, and for a moment, there is no proxy, no sword, no scroll, just two people, newly entangled, learning the rules of a game that neither of you designed, but both of you must now play. You're reclining on a chaise, nibbling candied ginger and pretending to enjoy the mid-morning sun when a court physician enters your chamber unannounced, clears his throat and says, "We'd like to examine your womb." No one blinks, not your ladies in waiting, not the older duchess sipping her spiced wine by the window. Certainly not the physician, who is already unpacking a satchel filled with herbs, linen cloths, and far too many metal tools. You sigh, because you knew this was coming. Every royal bride knows. Once the marriage is sealed, whether in person or by proxy, your true duty begins. You must produce heirs, not just children, sons, healthy, legitimate, politically advantageous sons, ideally with strong lungs, symmetrical faces, and the correct number of toes. And to do that, your womb must be certified. Mainstream historical fact. In the 16th century, women of royal blood were often subjected to invasive and wholly unscientific fertility exams. These ranged from examining their natural warmth with heated spoons, to inspecting urine in moonlight, to feeding them certain foods and watching how quickly they blushed. It was part guesswork, part theatre, and all humiliation. You try to maintain dignity as you're asked increasingly inappropriate questions with increasingly clinical detachment. Do your courses flow regularly? Do your hips ache with the moon? How many times per week do you couple? Do you feel the fluttering in your belly after? You're told to avoid cold food, to wear wool over your abdomen, to abstain from cinnamon, but increase your intake of pomegranate seeds. You're handed tinctures, tonics, oils. One smells like boiled garlic and despair. Your husband is also evaluated, of course, briefly, discreetly. Two ministers pull him aside, ask if he feels vigorous, and offer him a walnut. That's it. He returns to falconry. You return to charting the exact days of your cycle in a codex locked with a silver clasp. A quirky tidbit. In medieval Italy, one test for female fertility involved rubbing scented oil on the woman's inner arm, then checking whether the scent reached her mouth by morning. If it did, her channels were considered open and functional. If not, well, better start praying. Historians still argue whether royal courts actually believed in these methods or simply needed something to blame. After all, if the Queen couldn't conceive, you needed a narrative, a scapegoat, an explanation that didn't implicate the King's questionable diet or his frequent late-night visits to Lady Juliet's private wing. You're told not to ride horses anymore. Then you're told you must ride to align the womb. You're forbidden from dancing, then invited to lead 3 court dances in a row to encourage circulation. You are, at all times, the national uterus, a political organ wrapped in pearls and protocol. Every time you feel slightly ill, even a headache, the court begins to whisper. Is it a sign? Is she with child? Does she glow? They bring you milk, they summon midwives, they draw lots to name the baby. And when you aren't pregnant, there are murmurs about curses, about past lovers, about whether your bloodline has ever truly been fertile. A historian, somewhere in the archives, produces a scroll stating your great-aunt once had a fainting uterus. That settles it. You are fragile. So you begin the rituals. You sleep on certain sides. You burn specific herbs at twilight. You wear charms, one around your neck, one in your slipper, one hidden in the hem of your nightgown. You fast. You feast, you pray. One afternoon, a bishop offers to bless your belly. You let him. He draws a cross so wide it catches the edge of your bodice. You smile anyway. Your first pregnancy arrives quietly. No parades. Not yet. Just a subtle change, a weariness, a heaviness, a pause before your next cycle that doesn't end. You tell your maid in a whisper. She weeps, then tells 6 more people. By sunset, the entire court knows, and the pressure doubles. Suddenly, you're swaddled in protection, guards at every door, no more public appearances, a new food taster, twice the size of the old one. The court astrologer spends hours hunched over your chart, mumbling about Jupiter and milk teeth, and then 6 weeks later, you wake to pain and blood and silence. The morning is brief, because no child ever drew breath, no cry, no crown, no heir. You're told it's common, that it happens, that many queens have suffered worse. You're also told not to be seen crying. The people need strength, someone says. You smile. And try again. Because you must. Because your value is still measured in possibility, not grief. Because the kingdom doesn't pause for broken hearts or empty cradles. And one day, maybe, when the stars align and the right oil is burned, and the moon is just so, and your womb finally holds life long enough for the trumpet to sound, they will call you blessed, not for who you are, but for what you carried. The carriage arrives 3 days early, escorted by a full cavalry unit and a banner the size of a sail. It stops at the castle gates, the horses steaming, the footmen stiff with pride. A diplomat steps out with a scroll, a bow, and a velvet chest the size of a coffin. Inside, a wedding gift. You're still sipping your morning broth when the announcement arrives. The Grand Duke of Ilvaria presents his most honoured wedding offering to Her Majesty the Queen. You know what's coming. Wedding gifts in royal circles aren't sweet gestures or lovely surprises. They're statements, calculated, layered, and frequently dangerous. A single gemstone can hint at war. A tapestry can recall ancient grievances. One wrong token can spiral into insult, scandal, or open conflict. Mainstream historical fact. In 1625, when Henrietta Maria of France married King Charles I of England, she brought with her not just gifts, but an entire entourage of Catholic priests. England, staunchly Protestant, was not amused. The gift nearly sparked religious riots. They politely returned the priests. The tension lingered for decades. The chest before you clicks open. Inside is a golden statue of a falcon devouring a serpent. Beautifully crafted, detailed down to the feathers. It gleams under torchlight. It also just happens to be the historic symbol of your father's greatest enemy triumphing over your ancestral house. A subtle jab, a very unsubtle metaphor. You smile, you say, "How exquisite," and you send a polite thank you letter along with a modest tapestry from your dowry that depicts the falcon being hunted by a lion. Quirky tidbit, in some parts of Europe, entire armies were hidden within wedding gifts. Seriously, there are accounts, apocryphal but persistent, of gift wagons containing not gold or incense, but fully armed soldiers waiting to storm the castle under the guise of goodwill. Royalty rarely accepted anything too large without a full inspection, even the fruit baskets. Historians still argue whether some wars began over misinterpreted gifts or whether the gifts simply became excuses for conflict. When 2 monarchs already hated each other, it didn't take much. A cracked vase, a poorly timed shipment of silk, or a misnamed portrait to ignite fury. Yes, the portrait. It arrives 2 weeks after your wedding, sent by a distant cousin of your husband's with ambitions of inheritance. The canvas is massive, the frame gilded. The title? The Queen as She Might Have Been. You're depicted as shorter, rounder, paler, holding a sheaf of wheat instead of a scepter. You are, in essence, a milkmaid with a very flattering caption. The court snickers. You have it hung in the dining hall for 3 days. Then you quietly have it moved to the stables, where it becomes a favourite perch for the royal owl. Gifts keep coming. A lute strung with golden wire, tuned to a scale no musician can decipher. A mechanical bird that sings in 5 languages except yours. A mirror rumoured to show your true intentions when you look into it. You peer in and see only your tired eyes and slightly crooked tiara. And then, trouble. A shipment of Venetian glass arrives from the court of your sister-in-law, packaged in emerald silk. The message reads, as delicate and clear as your intentions. Your husband chokes on his wine. Why? Because emerald silk in your husband's dialect is a coded insult, historically used to imply cowardice and betrayal. Suddenly the feast is cancelled. The ambassador is summoned. You're asked if you had any involvement in the message. You did not. You were busy feeding grapes to the swan. But now the court is aflame with speculation. Is your sister-in-law undermining your position? Is this a warning or just a very expensive misunderstanding? You send a gift in return, a bottle of rare perfume. Harmless, yes? Until they notice the label bears a symbol used by your grandmother's rebel faction during the coastal uprising. You swear it was unintentional. No one believes you. The king's ministers debate retaliatory tariffs on citrus. An artist begins painting a new official portrait of you, one where your eyes glint. You are suddenly once again the center of the political storm because of a perfume bottle and a silk wrap. You retreat to your private study, to the gardens, to the quiet places where gifts can't reach and metaphors don't poison the air. Except they do. Even your roses are a gift from the northern province that still wants independence. Every blossom, every embroidery pattern, every crystal goblet on your supper table. A symbol, a stake in the game. You begin sending gifts yourself, small ones, precise, thoughtful. A book of poetry to the Dowager Countess, a carved pendant to the High Chancellor's wife, a jewelled hair comb to a visiting duchess known for her silence. Each one is a whisper. I see you. And slowly the tension softens. Just a little, because in this world, a gift is never just a gift. It is a weapon, a warning, a wager, and sometimes a second chance. You're 15 when the messenger arrives, boots muddied, face drawn from sleepless nights and dangerous roads. He bows low to your father, then kneels. The room falls silent. Everyone knows what's coming. Your cousin sunk the enemy's flagship last week. The kingdom is technically at peace, but the sea is not. And now someone must apologize, not with words, not with money, with you. You are the apology. You are the treaty in velvet, the sorry for the firebombing silk package, the smiling proof that despite everything, despite the raids and the insults and the accidental burning of a border monastery, your two kingdoms still wish to pretend they're on speaking terms. Welcome to the delicate, humiliating world of princesses used as political apologies. You're scrubbed, scented, fitted for a gown, stitched faster than a battle prayer. You're not asked if you're willing. You're told, gently, that this is your moment to serve the realm, that your grace will heal rifts, your presence will calm tensions. You ask who you'll be marrying. The answer is evasive. A son of their noble house. Which son, they don't say. Mainstream historical fact. Isabella of Valois was married to King Richard II of England at just 6 years old as part of a peace settlement during the 100 Years' War. It wasn't love. It wasn't even adolescence. It was symbolism, a living banner that said, let's all calm down. Your journey to the enemy court is ceremonial, beautiful, and deeply surreal. Along the route, peasants bow, soldiers salute, and priests chant blessings in 2 languages, one you know, one you don't. You wave with practiced grace, even as your stomach flips. Because you know how this looks. To them you are not a bride, you are a concession, a pearl-wrapped apology. You arrive at the border, the same border where your uncle was killed in a skirmish, where your cousin's cavalry torched 3 villages, where a statue of a lion was knocked down and replaced with a stag, and then replaced again, depending on which side last held the hill. And now here you are, wearing the embroidery of both houses stitched into your hem. The ultimate rebrand, the smiling ceasefire, quirky tidbit. In some medieval treaties, it was common to send not just a princess, but an entire entourage of political bridesmaids. Young noblewomen meant to reinforce the union, often married off to minor lords during the same ceremony, like gift wrapping a political reset. Historians still argue whether these bride as apology marriages ever actually helped. Some led to lasting peace, others collapsed when the princess failed to produce heirs or simply fell ill, was accused of spying, or refused to bow to the wrong noble. You walk into your new court like a sacred object. They welcome you with music, flowers, applause laced with tension. Your new husband greets you with a bow and the wary look of someone inspecting a suspicious gift basket. He is not unkind, but he is careful. Every word, every gesture is measured, like he's waiting to see if you explode. He leans in and whispers, "I'm sorry for what happened at the monastery." You don't reply. You don't have to. Your entire presence is a reply. The next few days are exhausting. Ceremonies, dinners, performances, toasts. People ask if you play the lute, if you dance. If your kingdom really meant to insult their archbishop last spring, you smile and pour wine and avoid eye contact with the general who ordered the naval blockade. And then the gifts arrive from your homeland, paintings of doves, gold-trimmed prayer books, a tapestry of two trees, their roots entwined, very subtle. Your husband presents you with a necklace set with stones from the disputed mines. You place it around your neck without flinching. Everyone exhales. You're watched constantly, not for scandal, for sincerity. Do you look grateful? Do you speak their language correctly? Do you walk past the statues of their saints without sneering? One wrong move and the narrative collapses. You're no longer a bridge, you're a provocation. You learn quickly. You host teas. You ask questions about the local customs. You learn the names of the nobles' children. You compliment the stained glass, the weather, the consistency of their custards. You become the politest hostage in history. And, slowly, the mood shifts. A countess takes your hand at a banquet and says, "I think we hated you more before we met you." You laugh. It's the most honest moment you've had in weeks. Soon there are whispers that your husband actually likes you, that he defends you during council, that he told the ambassador from the north to mind his tone. You overhear a young page say, "The Queen smiled at me," and say it like it's a medal. You didn't start the war, you didn't end it, but you may have saved the next one, and yet you will always know. You were the olive branch, the stitched-up wound, the bandage applied too late. When people look at you, they see what was lost, but maybe, just maybe, they'll also see what was salvaged. He throws a silver spoon at the servant's face before you've even finished your introduction. It lands with a melodic clang, and the room freezes. Your new husband is 5 years old and a tyrant. You blink, curtsy low, and say in your softest diplomatic voice, "It is an honor, Your Majesty." He stares at you, snot gleaming in one nostril, and says, "Your dress is stupid." Ah, love at first sight. Welcome to the unique misery of being married to a royal toddler. This is not a metaphor. You are 15 or 20 or 23, depending on the alliance, and your husband, the crown prince, is still chewing with his mouth open and occasionally attempting to ride the family dog like a warhorse. He rules nothing yet except the palace nursery, where his authority is absolute and backed by a terrifying army of governesses. But you are officially his wife. Mainstream historical fact. In the 14th century, Richard II of England married Isabella of Valois when he was 29 and she was 6. Their union was political, meant to cement peace between England and France. Unsurprisingly, the marriage was never consummated, and the poor girl ended up a widow by age 11. Your own arrangement follows the same script, a betrothal that turned into a marriage in name only. You are effectively his royal babysitter with jewels. The expectation is that the real marriage, the bed, the heirs, the coronation portraits, will happen once he's, well, able to spell your name without reversing the letters. Until then, you live in limbo. You are not a bride. You are not a queen. You are a walking, talking promise. Quirky tidbit? Some child husbands were allowed to sit in on council meetings while their adult wives were banned, because technically he was king, even if he thought Parliament was a kind of pudding. Historians still argue whether these early royal matches helped solidify long-term diplomacy or just confused the line of succession. In many cases, the child monarchs died before the marriages could be fully realized, leaving their adult wives stranded between widowhood and diplomatic ambiguity. You try to be patient. You smile when he offers you a slightly sticky apple. You kneel and listen as he explains his plan to outlaw bedtime. You nod solemnly when he tells you his doll is Minister of War. He paints your favorite horse blue. He once declared your embroidery illegal. You clap. He likes you in a chaotic, feral way. He orders his servants to bring you the biggest slice of cake. He insists you sit next to him during lessons, which now involve a confusing mix of Latin, finger painting, and questions like, what do clouds eat? And then there are the tantrums. Oh, the tantrums. One afternoon, he refuses to wear his ceremonial slippers and throws them at a cardinal. Another time, he attempts to bite a visiting duke who dares correct his grammar. He screams if you speak to his governess. He sulks for an hour if you don't laugh at his jokes, one of which involved an actual toad. You, meanwhile, are expected to be graceful, to guide, to nurture, to lay the foundation for a happy reign, as the court tutors so delicately put it, but you're also being watched, not for maternal skill, for loyalty. The regents want to know where your allegiances lie. Will you shape him into a future king that serves their faction? Or are you merely biding your time, waiting until he matures enough to be useful? You learn quickly that your real power lies in your proximity. You can whisper ideas, suggest bedtime stories with moral lessons suspiciously close to policy positions, praise certain ministers in your goodnight rituals, encourage alliances using building blocks and dollhouses. It's ridiculous. It's effective. You become a master of courtly nursery politics until the day he turns 7. The court hosts a lavish feast. He wears a miniature crown and declares pudding the enemy of the realm. Everyone laughs, but then he says something new, something no one wrote for him. A command, small but deliberate, one that rearranges his advisors' priorities. And suddenly, they start taking him seriously, which means they start watching you even more. Your marriage, once a legal formality, begins shifting towards something real. Not romantic, no, not yet, maybe never. But political, tangible. You're instructed to oversee his tutors. You're given keys to parts of the palace that were previously locked. Your opinions are now requested at dinner. Your womb is quietly discussed behind fans and ledgers. You are no longer just his caretaker. You are now a vessel. The clock begins ticking. You find yourself staring at him sometimes, this child with jam on his chin and a kingdom in his veins, and wondering who he will become. What kind of man will rise from the noise and the toys and the marching lessons? Will he remember that you held his hand when he had nightmares? Or will he replace you with someone younger when he grows into his crown? Only time will tell. But until then, you stay, you guide, you smile, and you pray that when he becomes king, truly king, he remembers who helped him stop eating chalk. You live in a castle with 100 rooms and not a single warm one. Not really. There are velvet cushions, crackling fireplaces, marble floors, embroidered tapestries, but the warmth is all aesthetic, decorative, meant for guests, meant for show. The truth is that your royal residence is a cathedral of silence, a fortress of glances that never meet, a palace of cold shoulders, because in many royal marriages, once the treaty is signed and the heir is born or attempted, the job is done. The affection part, that's optional, often omitted, conveniently forgotten. You and your spouse live under the same gilded roof, but occupy different lives. He sleeps in the West Wing, you in the East. You might share a meal once a week, a carriage ride every fortnight, public appearances when necessary. But beyond that, you're ghosting each other in brocade. Mainstream historical fact: Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette lived in the same palace at Versailles for years before truly connecting as a couple, if they ever really did. Historians still debate how long it took for their marriage to be consummated. Some say 7 years. And during that time, their separate apartments and stiff routines reflected the distance between them. you experience something similar. You dress each morning knowing you won't see him. You host visitors, oversee the linen orders, meet with your confessor, walk through your assigned gardens. You nod to his hunting dogs in the courtyard. You sometimes hear his laughter echoing down the stone hall. But he never comes to your door. At court functions, you perform the part of a couple. You take his arm, you sip from the same goblet, you smile when he praises your embroidery. But you know it's theatre, and so does everyone else. Quirky tidbit? In some European palaces, kings and queens had colour-coded pathways to avoid bumping into each other unintentionally. Servants were trained to open or close specific doors depending on who was walking where. Marriage by choreography? Historians still argue whether royal separations were matters of preference, tradition, or quiet rebellion. Some monarchs genuinely disliked their spouses, others simply believed that intimacy bred weakness, or worse, gossip. And some consorts simply faded into separate wings without complaint, because complaint itself was considered unfashionable. You once asked a footman if your husband was in the castle. The man flushed and said, "Uncertain, Your Majesty?" You knew he was lying. You also knew he wasn't supposed to answer, even if you were on fire. Sometimes you pass each other in the corridor. You nod, he nods. Sometimes he says, "Majesty," like it's a title and not a memory. One time you brushed hands by accident. You both apologized. This is what being married can look like when power matters more than love. Your chambers are beautiful. They face the lake. Your bed is carved with golden leaves and lined with imported velvet. You write letters there, read imported poetry, feed your pet finch bits of almond cake, and you are lonely. The kind of loneliness that has no name, not widowhood, not exile, not disgrace, just distance, carefully measured, consensually maintained. You receive word that your husband is visiting one of his retreats, a hunting lodge, or a country manor with suspiciously luxurious furnishings and a conveniently unnamed hostess. No one says it, but everyone knows it. You sip your wine anyway, because the alternative is showing emotion. One night, during a storm, lightning cracks the sky wide open. The roof shakes. You sit in the dark for a moment and wonder, if you screamed right now, would anyone come? You don't scream. You rise, ring for your maid, and have your hair braided for bed, because that's the role, that's the contract. You speak with foreign ambassadors about trade routes, while your husband plays cards with visiting nobles in the wine cellar. You write charitable letters while he disappears for days on horseback. You host music nights. He hosts whatever it is kings host when the queen isn't invited. And yet the people adore the idea of you, the pair of you. There are tapestries, medals, tiny portraits of your faces pressed together on coins. They call you the harmonious sovereigns. You've never heard him call you by your first name. You once asked him, in a rare moment of solitude, if he believed your marriage could be more than ceremony. He replied, "That would be a dangerous luxury." You understood. You didn't agree, but you understood. So you write letters to your mother. You tend your garden. You learn to speak in formalities, in passive sentences. You master the art of smiling without expectation, of listening without hope. And still you wear your crown, because even in the frostbitten spaces of this marriage there is still dignity, still the subtle kind of power that survives on patience and posture and perfectly timed silences. You live in a castle of cold shoulders, but you walk its halls with your head high, because one day, perhaps, the silence might break. And if it doesn't, you'll still be standing. You thread the needle carefully, guiding silk through linen with the patience of someone who's spent far too long being underestimated. The embroidery frame sits in your lap, a delicate hoop of vine and flower, peonies today, though yesterday it was roses, and tomorrow it might be snakes. To the casual observer, you're simply passing the time, a royal pastime, a woman's harmless art. But you know better. Because in the cold, polished world of royal courts, where every hallway echoes and every mirror listens, power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers, in stitches. Welcome to espionage via embroidery, the quietest form of rebellion. Mainstream historical fact. During the 16th and 17th centuries, noblewomen across Europe, including queens, used embroidery as a covert communication tool. Secret symbols were sewn into cuffs, hems, handkerchiefs, or wall hangings. Some messages were political, some were personal. Some were incriminating enough to get people executed. You pick a thread dyed with crushed beetle shells, deep crimson, almost regal, almost threatening. Each loop, each flourish is precise, intentional. Today's message is for your cousin. A coded reminder to delay a marriage alliance that threatens your family's inheritance. You stitch a white lily upside down beside a falcon with 3 tail feathers, both common motifs but with meanings only you two were taught years ago in the corner of a forgotten nursery. The court thinks you're making a cushion cover. You're drafting strategy. Your maid hands you another spool of thread. She's trained, of course, knows which colours mean wait, which borders mean yes, which stitched birds mean do not trust this man. She helps without asking questions. That's what makes her valuable. That's what makes her dangerous. Quirky tidbit. Mary, Queen of Scots, is believed to have used embroidery to smuggle secret messages during her imprisonment. She stitched symbols, initials, and even ciphers into her needlework, which her allies later read and acted upon. Her hobby? Statecraft in satin. Historians still argue how much was innocent and how much was intentional. Some dismiss the codes as coincidence. Others believe entire rebellions were plotted in floral arrangements. You don't need them to agree because you know what your latest design really says. The beauty of needlework is how easily it blends in. No one suspects the woman sitting quietly near the fire, fingers moving with rhythmic calm, smile polite, eyes lowered. No one suspects the embroidery gifted to an ambassador's wife might contain warnings hidden in stitch counts or deliberately chosen herbs in the dye. You once sent a handkerchief to your husband's treasurer. On the corner, you embroidered a cluster of grapes tied with a gold ribbon. 3 days later, he declined a bribe from the Eastern trade guilds. No one asked why. But you know, because you gave him the signal for watch your purse, and you watch silently as ministers argue and treaties form. You sit at the edge of their maps and their debates, never invited to speak, but always listening, always stitching. One day, a foreign princess visits. She brings a gift, a panel of intricate embroidery featuring vines, birds, and strange curling knots. It's lovely, dense, oddly layered. You spend the afternoon studying it. That night, you draft a reply, not with ink, but with thread, and the next morning, you gift her a scarf, stitched with forget-me-nots, scallop shells, and a single thistle. If she knows what it means, she'll smile. If she doesn't, well, she'll still have something to wear. There's power in plausible deniability. You learn to use it. A minister offends you, you don't complain. You stitch his family crest into a scene of wolves devouring sheep and gift it to his wife. Within a week, his behavior improves. You're asked to send tokens to a faraway duchy. You embroider 4 handkerchiefs, each with a different bird perched on a different tree. Only one is safe. The others carry subtle warnings. If the Duchess chooses wisely, peace. If not, well, you finish a new piece, a simple cushion, embroidered with roses and ivy, and place it in the Queen Mother's private chapel. She sits on it for 3 days before realizing you've outlined her late husband's rumored mistress in fine black thread along the border. You smile at dinner. She doesn't. Not all your messages are threats. Some are comfort. You stitch prayers into your lady-in-waiting's shawl when her brother is executed. You sew tiny moons into your own nightgown when your stomach aches, and you hope, faintly, quietly, that maybe this time you're carrying a child. You wear that nightgown until it frays, and still you stitch, because while your husband writes decrees and your council debates coinage, you are spinning diplomacy, warning rebellion, and remembrance into every seam of the palace, and when history looks back it may not know your name. But if they ever study your needlework closely enough, they'll realize you were always speaking, even when no one thought you had a voice. The bed sheets are displayed the next morning, just as tradition demands, white linen folded carefully, carried in by two blushing servants and laid across the bishop's table like holy relics. There's nothing on them, no stain, no thread out of place, no sign of anything at all, and yet by mid-morning the trumpets blare. The court poet is already drafting verses about your honoured consummation. The bishop nods solemnly. The king's mother says, "Praise be." A feast is announced in your honour. You lie in bed perfectly still, staring at the carved ceiling. You did not touch each other last night, but you both lied. And now the whole kingdom believes you're truly, legally and intimately joined. Welcome to Wedding Night Lies and Succession Fakes, where history is written by the boldest actor and the best laundress. Mainstream historical fact. In 1499, Arthur, Prince of Wales, and Catherine of Aragon were married and reportedly consummated their union. Years later, when Arthur died and Catherine married his brother Henry VIII, she claimed the marriage had never been consummated, an argument critical to Henry's later attempt to annul the union. Historians still argue about who was telling the truth. The bedsheets, long gone. You begin to understand how fragile the truth is in royal marriage. It's not what happened that matters. It's what people believe happened. And that belief can crown kings or destroy them. A servant once told you about a noble bride who brought her own blood in a small sealed vial to her wedding night. A prick to the finger, a drop on the sheet, a legacy secured. She had 3 sons. 2 became generals. The 3rd became a priest. No one ever questioned her again. You're not that clever or that calculating. But you are now a participant in a very old game. You and your husband agreed, silently, wordlessly in a moment of shared dread. Let's just say we did, because he was nervous, because you were exhausted, because the bishop was lurking just outside the door, and because neither of you were ready. But the consequences of failure? Unthinkable. A non-consummated marriage could be annulled, could unravel alliances, could be interpreted as a sign of divine disfavour, and worst of all, it could invite replacement. So you let the lie bloom like a rose in winter. By noon, the palace is humming with celebration. You're gifted a brooch shaped like a dove. You receive 7 trays of sweetmeats. One noble even composes a short, deeply uncomfortable ballad about the fruitful joining of noble hearts. You applaud. You sip watered wine. You consider setting the ballad on fire. Then come the questions. From the ladies-in-waiting, from your mother-in-law, from the steward's wife. All delivered in cooing tones, each inquiry a disguised interrogation. Did he treat you gently? Was it as lovely as they say? Did you feel the stirring of destiny within? You nod, smile, say yes to all. Inside, you feel nothing but dread, because if this charade is discovered, if anyone proves that your marriage is not fully complete, your life unravels like an undone corset. But worse, if you ever do produce an heir and someone questions the legitimacy of that first night, everything falls apart. That's how succession fakes begin. Quirky tidbit? One medieval duchess reportedly faked not just the consummation, but an entire pregnancy. She claimed to be with child for over a year. When no baby arrived, she announced the child had died mysteriously at birth. Years later, a rival claimed she'd hidden a pillow under her gowns the entire time. History never figured it out. You walk a dangerous line. Every stomachache, every missed cycle, every faint flush in your cheeks is scrutinized. People begin to speculate. You hear one courtier say, "I think she's with child," before you've even stood up from the table. You're not yet. But the pressure builds, and when the time comes to claim a pregnancy, it must align perfectly with the court's belief in that phantom wedding night. Too early and they'll whisper. Too late and they'll doubt. So you play your part. You accept blessings, you stroke your belly in public, you thank the midwives who wink at you knowingly. You pretend, until one day perhaps you won't have to. Until the morning you wake, queasy, sweating, and realize the lie is becoming real. Your maid weeps when you tell her. The bishop beams, the court bells ring again. And no one, asks whether the child is from that first wedding night or the second or the sixth, or from sheer divine intervention. Because the pageant worked, the curtain stayed up, the sheets stayed white. And history, once again, can't tell the difference between silence and truth. The first sign is small. Your portrait in the Great Hall moved just a few inches. Not enough for anyone to comment, but enough for you to notice. Then the invitations stop arriving. First the hunting party, then the spring concert, then the annual wine tasting where you usually pretend to enjoy flute music and fermented berries. You are still queen, still married, still officially beloved of the realm. But the court has begun its slow, calculated rejection. This is how royal divorces often begin, not with slamming doors but with drifting silence, a kind of political frostbite, one missed invitation at a time. Mainstream historical fact: Anne of Cleves, Henry VIII's fourth wife, agreed to an annulment within months. Her marriage had never been consummated, Henry claimed. She was unattractive, and yet she survived with a generous settlement and the title, the King's beloved sister. Compared to her successors, she got off easy. You won't be so lucky, because this marriage is not just a disappointment, it's an inconvenience. You haven't produced a living heir. You have allies, yes, but fewer than you once had. And now there's a younger noblewoman being whispered about at court. She smiles at the king too long. She plays the harp. She wears dresses that mirror your own, just newer. You try to remain composed. You attend chapel. You host dignitaries. You send letters to your husband complimenting his council speeches. He replies with courteous indifference. You sign your name with a flourish. You do not ask if he reads it. Then one morning you find your bedchamber locked. Temporarily, they say. A misunderstanding. You are moved to a guest suite closer to the chapel. You laugh once, quietly, then stop, because you understand the truth. You are no longer wife. You are problem. Quirky tidbit? In the 18th century, Caroline of Brunswick, wife to George IV of England, was effectively exiled from court. Her husband attempted to divorce her publicly in Parliament, citing all manner of scandal. She showed up uninvited to his coronation and was turned away at the door. Historians still argue how often royal divorces were legal versus just social. In Catholic courts, divorce was nearly impossible, so women were separated, exiled to nunneries, or simply erased from the public eye. In Protestant regions, annulments and divorces happened more often, but with far less mercy. You are summoned to a private room, no tapestries, no witnesses. Your husband stands beside the Chancellor. He does not sit. He does not ask how you are. He simply says, this marriage is no longer politically viable. You ask if he wishes to end it. He says nothing. The Chancellor does. He reads from a scroll outlining irreconcilable discord, failure to produce viable heirs, and loss of dynastic advantage. It's cold, formal. You recognize the phrasing. You used it once to describe a failed grain treaty. You ask what happens next. They offer exile, a country estate, a pension, a quiet life. No scandal, if you agree. If you sign, if you disappear. You ask, and if I refuse? They don't answer. But history does, because royal women who refuse to vanish rarely fare well. Some are sent to remote castles and guarded like criminals. Others are accused of treason, witchcraft, adultery. The last one? Beheaded on a windy morning while her ladies-in-waiting sobbed into their sleeves. You ask for a moment to think. They grant it. And so you sit, pen poised, with a future trembling in your hand. To sign is to surrender. To refuse is to gamble. The court is already preparing. Rumours are circling. The new favourite is being fitted for silks in your colours. A tailor has arrived from the capital. A new crest is being sketched. You could scream. You could run. You could set the chapel tapestries on fire and throw the ink pot through a stained glass window. Instead, you sign and smile. Because your dignity is the last thing they haven't taken. You leave the palace in silence. No parade, no farewell. Just a carriage, a road, and the sound of hooves on the stone. Your new residence is smaller but peaceful. You hang your own portraits, you tend the gardens, you write letters, you learn the names of birds, you stop dreaming about heirs. And some nights, when the moon is fat and low over the hills, you remember the crown, its weight, its chill, the price you paid for a throne that never loved you back. You are no longer queen, but you are still you, and that's something the axe can't touch. Your new brooch arrives wrapped in velvet and suspicion. A gift from a duchess you barely know, delivered with a smile too wide and a curtsy too deep. It's shaped like a lily, elegant, heavy, cold to the touch. You thank her graciously. You pin it to your cloak, and before you reach the end of the hall, you take it off, because in royal courts, jewelry doesn't just sparkle, it kills. Welcome to poison rings and dagger brooches, where your accessories are as lethal as your alliances. Mainstream historical fact. Catherine de' Medici, the Queen of France in the 16th century, was rumoured to have worn a ring with a hidden compartment of poison. While many of the more theatrical tales remain unproven, there were documented accounts of poison being administered through perfumed gloves, hollowed-out rings, and even laced pages in books. Your own collection has been reviewed by your chief almoner, your Lady Chamberlain, and 2 discreet apothecaries. They test clasps, they sniff velvet, they scrape tiny bits from the underside of gemstones and examine them under lenses. Once, your necklace nearly killed the court cat. You've learned to be cautious, because every jewel in your collection could be a message or a murder attempt. A ruby might be a love token or a reminder of the cardinal you embarrassed during that feast. A sapphire ring might symbolize peace or serve as the perfect vessel for powdered wolfsbane. Quirky tidbit? The toothpick dagger was a favorite accessory for 15th century noblewomen. Slim, elegant, and sharp enough to pierce flesh or cork. Some wore them around the neck, others had them sewn into the bodice just in case diplomacy failed during dessert. Historians still argue how common these weapons really were, but they agree on one thing: noble courts were not safe spaces, especially not for women, especially not for women in power. You begin wearing less jewelry, or rather more careful jewelry. You favor pearls, harder to tamper with, brooches with solid backs, no hollow chambers, and gloves with reinforced seams. You stop accepting direct gifts. You politely lose items that arrive without documentation. You once caught your maid testing your comb by scratching it against her wrist and waiting for a rash. You gave her a raise. Your enemies are subtle: a clasp that opens too easily, a pin that leaves a greenish stain, a cameo that smells faintly of almonds. You pretend not to notice. You keep a drawer of gifts in storage, known privately as the Vault of Caution. You write thank you notes for each one. You don't wear them. The art of the poison ring is especially devious. Hinged lids disguised as filigree. Compartments so small they can only hold a single drop of venom, enough to ruin a cup of wine, enough to silence a rival mid-toast. You've seen it happen. A countess collapses during dinner. The culprit? Her own signet ring, a mechanism so delicate it could be activated by the flick of a pinky. The motive? Inheritance, or insult, or boredom. Take your pick. You once considered having one made, not to use, just to hold. A reminder. You even visited the smith in secret. He showed you a ring carved with ivy leaves, each leaf concealing a grain-sized compartment. You thanked him. You never returned. Because once you wear that kind of power, it's hard to take it off. Instead, you begin sending messages through your jewelry, subtle ones. A brooch in the shape of a crow for the diplomat who lied to you. A pin made of coral for the merchant who inflated his prices. A silver comb gifted to your sister-in-law after she tried to replace your lady-in-waiting with one of her spies. Each item carries a meaning. Each meaning is understood. You are still a queen, even in exile. Even without a throne, your wardrobe is watched. Your accessories analyzed. You pin a golden bee to your collar, and a rumor starts that you're aligning with the southern lords. You wear black on a saint's feast day, and an ambassador assumes you're in mourning, perhaps for a treaty. You let them wonder, because fear is fashion's finest detail. And when they ask what your brooch means, the one you wear every morning, shaped like a thorned rose, with a single pearl drop at its center, you smile and say, "It means I know how to defend myself." No one asks twice. The chapel smells of beeswax and compromise. You kneel at the altar, not because you believe, but because it is expected. The bishop's voice drones like a lazy bumblebee, thick with incense and Latin. You repeat the words after him, not quite your words, not quite your God, but the words that will make your marriage valid. This is what it takes now, not a dowry, not a trousseau, not even love, just conversion. Welcome to Forced Conversions for Matrimony, where belief becomes bargaining chip, and your soul is just another pawn on the royal chessboard. Mainstream historical fact. In 16th century Europe, religion was often a non-negotiable clause in marriage contracts. Protestant princesses married off to Catholic kings were expected to convert. Catholic noblemen seeking Protestant alliances likewise pledged allegiance to new churches, at least publicly. Entire state religions swung based on these matches, most notably when Henry of Navarre converted to Catholicism to become King of France, famously declaring, "Paris is well worth a mass." Your own conversion is less dramatic. No thunder, no visions, just a very serious priest, a small book of translated prayers, and a baptismal font that smells vaguely of forgotten limescale. You're not even sure what's being renounced anymore, your old beliefs, your family's traditions, or simply your control. You wonder if your grandmother would approve. She once hid a crucifix inside a rolled-up tapestry. She whispered her prayers in the garden, under the hydrangeas. She outlived 3 kings and 1 regime change, and still refused to say grace at anyone's table but her own. Now here you are, swapping creeds like embroidered gloves. You tell yourself it's temporary, that no one really expects conviction, just obedience, just paperwork, just a statement signed in triplicate that says, "You'll kneel facing that direction now, not the one you were raised with." The hardest part? The silence in your heart. You used to feel something in the old prayers, a flicker, a resonance. Now everything feels padded, softened, like trying to sing underwater. Quirky tidbit? In some royal courts, converts were forced to undergo not 1 but 2 baptisms, one to erase the original false faith, and a second to reinstall the new one. The ceremonies were long, uncomfortable, and often symbolic, dunking fully grown adults into basins meant for infants, reciting oaths in languages they didn't understand. Historians still argue whether these forced conversions were genuine or just theatre. Some believe the nobles involved sincerely changed faith. Others say the participants merely nodded along and returned to their original beliefs in private, until it was convenient to switch again. You suspect it's the latter, because religion at court isn't sacred, it's strategic. It decides inheritance, it determines alliances, it builds, or topples, empires. Your cousin once married a duke from across the border. She was told she must renounce her heretical leanings and attend Mass daily. She agreed, naturally. She was 15. What choice did she have? 3 years later, she was caught in her attic with a candle, a mirror, and a forbidden psalm book in her native tongue. They didn't arrest her, but they watched her every day after that. She learned to mouth along to hymns. You do too. You learn the right saints, the correct feast days. You cross yourself from the correct shoulder. You memorize the updated commandments. You replace your jewelry, no more ancestral amulets, just tiny gold crosses etched by someone else's God. And every time you pray, it's for permission to stop pretending. But the world keeps spinning. Treaties are signed. Ambassadors smile. A bishop congratulates you on your devotion. You say thank you. You do not laugh. You wonder if your children, if you ever have them, will believe this version of faith, or the one your mother whispered into your curls at bedtime. You hope they forget both, because belief in this life is a luxury. Loyalty is currency, and your soul? That was spent long ago in exchange for a seat at the royal table. Still, some nights you light a candle, not the official kind, not in the chapel. A private flame, hidden in a windowless alcove behind your wardrobe, and in that soft light you hum a tune your nursemaid once sang. Not a hymn, not a sermon, just memory, just you, just enough. The cradle is empty, but still they bring flowers. You wake to silence, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that tiptoes, rearranges your pillows and won't meet your gaze. The midwife is gone. The sheets are changed. The nursery door is closed, locked from the outside as if the absence might escape. This is not grief, not yet. This is protocol. Welcome to the politics of stillbirth and miscarriage, where tragedy wears a crown, and even your tears are observed for strategic value. Mainstream historical fact. In royal households, miscarriages and stillbirths were more than personal heartbreaks. They were dynastic emergencies. Queen Anne of Great Britain suffered at least 17 pregnancies, many ending in miscarriage or early death, leaving her without a living heir. The failure to produce a successor often destabilized entire kingdoms. You lie still and try to feel something. But the truth is, you're already exhausted, not just from the loss, but from the performance that follows it. There will be a statement, carefully worded by court scribes. It will use phrases like natural causes, God's will, or a sadness shared by the realm. There will be no mention of your diet, your stress, or the chilling draft in the North Tower bedroom where they insisted you sleep. They won't talk about the blood. They never do. The midwives will say you wept like a saint. The bishop will offer blessings. The kitchen staff will boil special broths. The ladies-in-waiting will hover with downcast eyes and hopeful hands, brushing your hair as if they can smooth the sorrow from your scalp. But no one will say what you lost. A child, a future, a claim to power, or just your last bargaining chip. Because the moment the healer whispered no heartbeat, the court began to shift. You felt it like a tremor under your feet. Smiles tightened, alliances whispered, timelines redrawn. You are no longer the expectant hope of the dynasty. You are now a liability with empty arms. Quirky tidbit? In 15th century Castile, Queen Isabella's pregnancy loss prompted the construction of a chapel where she prayed daily for the souls of her unborn children. The prayers were recorded, copied, and distributed, part devotion, part propaganda, part reminder that even failed pregnancies could serve political optics. Historians still argue whether royal women were mourned or blamed for such losses. Some were celebrated for their bravery, others accused of sin, witchcraft, or disloyalty. It all depended on how useful their suffering was to the crown. You are instructed to rest and reflect. Translation: stay out of sight. The nursery is dismantled, the cradle removed, the toys sent to a convent. Even the embroidered swaddling cloth is burned, as if the absence might infect the palace like a fever. You try to remember the details, how far along you were, whether you felt the baby move, what you dreamt the night before. But your memory is damp and frayed. You think you called them little star. Or maybe that was just in your head. Either way, no one else will remember. In court, if there is no child to show, no proof, then there is no legacy. Only suspicion. Was it your fault? Did you drink something wrong? Ride too far? Eat spoiled fruit? You read the theories in their eyes. You overhear the whispers. One duchess suggests you were cursed by the former queen's mother. Another says the bloodline is delicate. Another blames the stars. You keep your silence, because nothing you say will satisfy them, and everything you say might condemn you. The king visits once. He brings you a prayer book. He says, "We must try again soon." He does not stay for your answer. You nod. You are alone. Again. You begin to mark the days not with calendars but with bruises, tiny ones from your own grip, from how hard you hold your blankets at night to stop from crying aloud. You hear a lullaby one evening, sung to another woman's child, and it feels like drowning, but you don't break, because queens don't get to. They grieve through duty, through careful smiles, through the cruel comfort of knowing that in time your body will be expected to try again, as if it were a field, as if it could simply be replanted, and you will try, because you must, because the alternative is exile or replacement, or watching another woman cradle the future that was supposed to be yours. So you sit up, you drink the broth, you kiss the cross, you let them believe you are healing, and somewhere deep within you place the memory of that unborn child in a secret garden of your mind where they will be safe, untouched by history, politics, or blame. And you whisper goodnight. To the child, they won't count, but you will never forget. The family tree isn't a tree anymore, it's a wreath, a tight little circle of interlocking branches that twist, double back, and marry each other every other generation. You've stopped trying to explain it to visitors because after the third cousin marries the fourth aunt's nephew to secure a grain port no one's really following anymore, welcome to uncles, nephews, and the marriage loop, where dynasties marry inward, genetics get dicey, and your husband might technically be your great-uncle's grandson's half-brother, but only on your mother's side. Probably. Mainstream historical fact. Royal houses, especially in Europe, were infamous for marrying within their own bloodlines to maintain political alliances and consolidate power. The Habsburgs of Spain are the most notorious case. Centuries of intermarriage led to profound genetic consequences, including the infamous Habsburg jaw and Charles II of Spain, whose physical and mental impairments were linked directly to inbreeding. You sip your morning tea and stare at a tapestry of your family's lineage. It's beautiful, gold-threaded, painstakingly embroidered. It also looks like someone spilled spaghetti on it and tried to map it afterward. There's your grandmother twice, once as a queen, once as a dowager duchess. There's your cousin, also your stepmother now, technically. There's your own name, embroidered in a slightly different shade, stitched alongside your husband's, who is also, you realize one morning, related to you through 4 separate lines. You make a note not to bring that up at dinner, because technically it's normal. Everyone at court has at least one uncle who became a father-in-law, one niece who became a daughter-in-law, one marriage that required 2 popes, a bishop, and a carefully worded footnote to make legal. It's exhausting. Quirky tidbit. In 1300s England, the future King Richard II was technically betrothed to a girl who was both his cousin and his aunt by marriage. The church had to grant a dispensation so elaborate it needed its own library shelf. Historians still argue how aware royals truly were of the dangers of inbreeding. Some claim they ignored the risks in favour of politics. Others suggest that royal advisers and clerics worked overtime to obscure the closeness of certain unions, sometimes falsifying family records to make the match appear more distant. You once asked your tutor how many cousins was too many. He said, more than 3 generations back is ideal. You nodded. You were engaged to your second cousin at the time. Your aunt, who is also your mother-in-law, explains the reasoning. It keeps the blood noble. Outsiders bring chaos, peasants bring war. You wonder if she's ever met a peasant. But you smile and nod because your daughter is now being considered for marriage. She's 10. The candidates include a boy of 13 who shares your last name and eye twitch, a duke's son with 4 fingers on one hand and a suspiciously droopy eyelid, a noble from another kingdom whose family crest looks alarmingly similar to your own. You request a new genealogical chart. It arrives with a note. All candidates cleared by the church. Degree of consanguinity acceptable. You stare at the word acceptable for several minutes, because acceptable still includes overlapping grandparents, shared great-uncles, and at least one common ancestor who died of mysterious facial swelling. You ask the royal physician if anyone's tracking the outcomes of these family trees. He says, only when they die young. You decide to expand the garden. You plant new roses, imported, not native. You walk among them every afternoon and imagine a world where marriages aren't math equations, where love is not a diplomatic tool, where your children can choose their futures without worrying if their spouse will share their surname twice. But that world isn't here. Here, marriage is strategy. Blood is currency. And genetics are something whispered about in back rooms when babies are born with extra digits or eyes that don't quite align. You've learned to keep quiet. to accept the tangled roots, to nod politely when a new engagement is announced and someone says, "Isn't she his cousin?" And someone else replies, "Yes, but only on the paternal side," as if that makes it better. And perhaps it does. Or perhaps it's just tradition, draped in silk, crowned in pearls, and quietly spinning in circles like a carousel you can't get off. You check your daughter's chart one more time, then fold it away, because whether you protest or not, the loop will continue. Until someone, someday, finally decides to plant a new tree. She walks into the hall like she owns it, because technically she does, not in title, not in law, not in anything official, but in practice. Her influence threads through every whisper, every smirk, every sudden change in court fashion. The queen wears pearls, she wears garnets. By the end of the week, every noblewoman's décolletage sparkles red. You know her name before you meet her. You know her scent, amber and crushed myrtle, before she ever speaks. She is the king's mistress, and somehow you're the one curtsying. Welcome to Mistresses with More Power Than Queens, where official titles mean very little, and the woman sleeping in the royal bed might not be the one wearing the crown. Mainstream historical fact: some royal mistresses wielded more political power than queens themselves. Madame de Pompadour, the famous mistress of Louis XV of France, held enormous sway over court appointments, artistic commissions, and even foreign policy. While the Queen remained a symbolic figure, Pompadour was a trusted advisor, and rumour had it even selected ministers. Your own situation is delicate. You are married to the king, after all. You were chosen for diplomacy, for pedigree, for your womb. She was chosen for amusement, for companionship, for love, maybe. But whatever the reason, she stays, and everyone learns to work around her. At first, you hate her. She sits where you're supposed to sit. She laughs too loudly. Her gowns are always a touch more daring than etiquette allows. She enters rooms like no one else matters, and somehow they all believe it. You try not to notice how the king watches her. You fail. Then one afternoon she visits your solar unannounced. You expect poison. Instead, she brings candied violets and a book of sonnets. "I thought you might like this," she says, smiling. It's from Florence, banned by the bishop. You blink, you take the book. And that's how it begins. Quirky tidbit: in many courts, queens and mistresses coexisted, sometimes in bitter rivalry, sometimes in quiet alliance. In 18th century England, Queen Caroline and King George II's mistress Henrietta Howard maintained a surprisingly civil relationship, even dining together and joking about the king's dull habits. Historians still argue how much of that civility was real and how much was survival strategy. You learn to play the game, because while she commands attention, you command ceremony. Her power is informal, volatile, based on affection. Yours is carved into protocol, signed in ink. You walk ahead of her in procession. You sit to her right at banquets. She may be adored, but you are crowned. And still, when she whispers to the king, things happen. Ambassadors are shuffled. New gowns arrive early. The kitchen begins serving more lemon dishes because she once said you liked them. You begin to wonder if she's protecting you. She never pretends to be queen. She never wears your colours. She praises your embroidery at court, insists the court painter add your favourite flowers to the spring portrait, and once, rather memorably, slaps a count across the face for suggesting your latest miscarriage was divine punishment. You don't know how to thank her, so you send roses, pale pink ones, and a note that says, "You're braver than I can afford to be." She never replies, but she wears a pale pink ribbon in her hair that evening. You sit side by side at a concert. Two women caught in a system neither designed, two lives forever tangled in the wake of a man who will never understand what it costs you both. And maybe she'll fall from favour someday. Maybe a newer face will arrive, younger, bolder, bouncier. But she'll survive. They often do. Some become duchesses. Some retire to lavish estates. Some quietly pen memoirs that scandalise future generations. You might even envy her, because she lives outside the rules while you are made of them. But then again, she envies you too. She told you once, during a rare, wine-soaked evening by the fire. "You have something I never will," she said softly. "A crown," you guessed. She shook her head. "No, a name that history will remember, no matter how many lovers he buries us with." You never forgot that, and when your own daughter marries, you tell her what your rival-turned-shadow friend taught you. Never underestimate the woman with no title. She's the one who sees the whole board. He's 7 years old and doesn't know where he's going. They've dressed him in velvet, brushed his hair until it shines, and pinned a tiny gold emblem to his chest. A crest he doesn't understand, from a land he's never seen. He asks where his dog is. No one answers, because today he becomes a promise. Welcome to When Kids Became Pawns 2, where childhood ends with a signature, and the smallest hands carry the heaviest treaties. Mainstream historical fact. Royal children were often used to seal political alliances. It wasn't uncommon for kids as young as 5 to be married, or at least formally betrothed, to heirs of rival kingdoms. Sometimes they were packed off immediately to be raised in their future in-laws' courts, never seeing their birth family again. Mary, Queen of Scots, was sent to France at age 5. Catherine of Aragon was shipped to England at just 3. You remember your own send-off. It was spring. You were 10. Your mother wept quietly while your father gave you a dagger for protection. You didn't know whether to laugh or be terrified. You chose terrified. You lived in a cold stone palace where no one spoke your language and the bread always smelled faintly of ash. They told you it was an honor. You believed them for 3 weeks, until you realized the other children didn't go home either. Now, watching your own son being fitted for his journey, you feel that same crack in your ribs, the one that says, this isn't motherhood, it's diplomacy. The Queen from the South has offered her daughter in return. She's 6. She'll be arriving by ship next month, escorted by guards and gold-embroidered dolls. The palace staff is already converting a wing into her new nursery. Quirky tidbit: some royal kids had contracts so complex they contained clauses about teeth. Yes, teeth. In the 1500s, noble families occasionally required evidence that the child had reached a certain stage of development, like the eruption of molars, before finalizing the marriage arrangements. Historians still argue whether these child alliances were effective diplomacy or just desperate gestures in a crumbling world order. Some say they prevented war. Others point out they often just delayed it and left traumatized children scattered across Europe in the meantime. You kneel to meet your son's eyes. He fidgets with a tassel. "Will there be horses?" he asks. You nod. He nods back. That's enough for him for now, but it's not enough for you. You remember the cold, the whispers, the way no one touched your hand without gloves, the aching years between letters home, the slow, dreadful realization that you weren't a child, but a chess piece, so you tuck something into his satchel, a linen square stitched with your initials and a pressed sprig of lavender from the garden where you used to read together. Not much, but something that smells like home, because the truth is, he'll grow up without you. They all do. Once sent abroad, these royal children are re-educated. New language, new manners, new loyalties. They are shaped like clay to fit into another family's mold. And when they finally marry, they are strangers to both sides. Some rebel, some vanish. Some write desperate poems about places they barely remember. You once read one, tucked into the margins of a Latin grammar book. My name is mine, but not my own. They borrowed me for peace and never gave me back. You folded the page like a prayer. You want to believe your son will be different, that the treaty will hold, that the alliance will bring peace, that someday he'll ride back through the palace gates not as a stranger, but as a bridge between 2 kingdoms. But the realist in you, the one shaped by years of silence, arranged meals and formal bows, knows better. He will become theirs. He has to, Because that's how it works. You send him with every advantage, books, tutors, maps, trinkets, blessings, and still it feels like sending him off to sea in a paper boat. You wave, you smile, you say, "Be brave." And he is, too brave, really, for someone so small. The court applauds, the priest offers blessings. The ambassador nods approvingly, and you go back inside and stare at a map of the world, trying to remember where your child now lives. The windows are open, but the air doesn't move. You lie in bed, propped on embroidered pillows, surrounded by velvet drapes and the faint scent of candle wax and old herbs. The court physician has gone quiet, never a good sign. A priest is murmuring something in Latin. Your chest feels like stone. You've always known this day would come. You just didn't expect the paperwork. Welcome to deathbed, marriages and final bargains, where love takes a back seat to legacy, and even your last breath might come with a contract. Mainstream historical fact. Deathbed marriages were not uncommon among nobility. In times of political crisis or desperation, monarchs or heirs might hastily marry or remarry before dying to secure an alliance, legitimize offspring, or fulfill the conditions of an inheritance. One of the most famous examples, the rushed marriage of Mary Tudor, Henry VIII's sister, to Charles Brandon was arranged on her deathbed, granting him influence even after her passing. But you're not thinking about romance right now. You're thinking about the kingdom and who gets what when you're gone. The Chancellor stands at your bedside with a quill. He clears his throat before reading the latest proposal. You half listen. Something about a disputed border, something about dowry lands, something about your niece marrying the rival king's cousin's bastard son. You manage a shrug. That'll do. They bring in the girl. Your niece? She's 17 maybe, has your hair, your temper. She's trying not to cry. You reach for her hand. It's just a signature, you whisper. She says nothing, but she signs, just like you did, just like your mother did before you. Quirky tidbit, in some cases monarchs even posthumously married off individuals, retroactively declaring a relationship to ensure property or titles passed as desired. The Habsburgs were notorious for this maneuver, effectively rewriting personal histories to preserve dynastic lines. Historians still argue whether these final arrangements were the dying ruler's will or the court's last-ditch scramble to maintain order. Some say kings and queens clung to control to their last breath. Others suggest that those around them merely moved their mouths like puppets, sealing deals as the monarchs slipped into unconsciousness. You try to focus on the priest's words, but your thoughts drift. To a boy you kissed once under a fig tree, to the child you never held, to the woman they said would ruin everything and did, wonderfully, to the friend you exiled and the silence that followed, to the feast when no one toasted you, to the moment your name became a title and the years you forgot how to be anything else. You ask for a mirror. They hesitate, but eventually they bring one, silver-framed, cold to the touch. You look. You are both more and less than you imagined. And then you laugh, just once. It hurts, because now they want your blessing, the king, the court, the realm, as if a whispered word from your cracked lips will secure the future. You give it, because if you don't, they'll forge it anyway. You're not the first royal to die with ink still drying on the treaty beside your bed. You won't be the last. But there's a strange comfort in the ritual, in knowing that even in death you're still part of the machinery, still useful, still symbolic. You ask for music, a lute, perhaps. Something soft, a melody you heard as a child. It comes, eventually, and you drift with it. Just before your breath begins to thin, you make one last request. No monuments, just a rose bush in the northern garden, the one that never quite bloomed right. Let it grow wild, let it belong to no one. and let them wonder why you chose that of all things to leave behind. They never made it into the tapestries, no golden threads for their names, no marble busts in echoing halls, no glowing portraits hung beside royal fireplaces, gazing down at future generations with practiced serenity. They were queens in all but title, wives in every way except public. And tonight, you walk among their memories. Welcome to the crownless queens and forgotten wives, where duty was not always honoured, and devotion was sometimes written in invisible ink. Mainstream historical fact. Many royal women who played central roles in dynastic politics were never officially recognised. Some were second or third wives whose marriages were considered morganatic, meaning they were not entitled to royal titles or inheritance. Others were quietly annulled, their names scrubbed from records to suit new alliances. Some were political hostages who married kings but were never crowned. One such woman, Anne Boleyn's sister, Mary. She may have borne King Henry VIII's children, but was never acknowledged as anything more than a courtier. Others, like Wallis Simpson, though far more modern, technically became the wife of a former king, but never held the title of queen. You pass their stories like unopened letters. The Duchess who ruled in her husband's absence, only to be dismissed when he returned and favoured someone younger. The noblewoman promised a crown, who instead received exile. The foreign bride, brought across the sea with trumpets and flowers, only to be imprisoned when war made her name inconvenient. They don't make it into textbooks, but they're there. In the worn margin of a forgotten ledger, in the faded initials carved into the underside of a windowsill, in the lullabies passed down through daughters across centuries, you recall a story your grandmother used to whisper, not in court, not aloud, but when you were small and sleepless. She waited, she said, waited through storms, wars, 3 queens and a plague. Still they never let her wear the crown, but they say her ring was buried with him, quietly, on the inside of the coffin. Quirky tidbit? Some kings secretly arranged for their most beloved but unofficial wives to be buried beside them, sometimes even hiding the arrangements from their legitimate heirs. In one notable case, a queen's tomb was altered after her death to include a second hidden compartment, for a woman history only mentioned in a footnote. Historians still argue whether these women wielded more power in silence than they ever could have from a throne. Some letters, newly uncovered, suggest they advised kings in private, influencing treaties, dismissals, and successions, all without ever being mentioned in council records. You think of them as you walk through the garden. You see her, a figure in soft grey, seated beside a lily pond, no crown, no retinue, just a lap full of letters, never sent. She looks up and smiles. You blink, she's gone. The candlelight plays tricks this late, doesn't it? You pause by a statue half swallowed by ivy. The plaque says nothing about her. But you know, she was the third wife. The one who kept the kingdom afloat while the king drank himself into legend. No title, no praise, just 3 lines in a monk's diary that mention her wisdom and warm broth. She doesn't need your sympathy, but she accepts your company. So you sit, and you remember, all of them. Not with grand speeches, but with a whisper, because that's how they lived, and sometimes how they ruled, and finally how they endure. As echoes in polished marble, as fingerprints on royal ink, as ghosts who never wore crowns but somehow never let them slip. And now, as the palace grows quiet and the halls dim into memory, you let yourself breathe slower, softer, lighter. You let the heavy velvet of history fall away like a winter cloak, no longer needed in the warmth of this moment. You're no longer wrapped in protocol, no longer clutching the edges of power like a lifeline, just you and the hush that follows the last candle's flicker. The air smells faintly of parchment and roses, not the manicured roses of court, tamed and perfumed and preened, but wild ones. The kind that grow between forgotten stones, uninvited, unapologetic. The kind that remember what the monuments forgot. You imagine the pages of these stories fluttering closed, not with a snap, but with a sigh, not erased, but resting, their voices, once tethered to duty, now drift free. Unbound from coronation gowns and poisoned rings and endless parchment trails, free to be women again, daughters, sisters, dreamers, perhaps even you. And if tonight you carry a little less weight on your chest, if your dreams take you not to castles but to meadows, if the names you heard echo gently in your sleep, then maybe they've done their work. Maybe you've done yours. Let the curtains draw, let the court fall silent. Let the ghosts put down their crowns, because the night is deep now, and your breath is steady, and no one is asking anything more of you. Just rest, sleep well, and remember, every forgotten queen was once a girl who imagined something different. She still might, and so might you.